Welcome back, legends. You're at OMNI Wizard. Another incredible story awaits. What if Harry awakened the Shadow Monarch System when Cedric died? Solo leveling X HP. Subscribe and hit the bell. Let's dive right in. Chapter 1. The door at the bottom of the dark. The cup hit the ground the same moment Cedric did. Harry didn't understand it at first. The way Cedric just dropped, like every string holding him upright had been cut at once. No stumble, no grab for balance. No last sound except the soft thud of a body hitting grass. The green light was already gone, already swallowed back into the wand that cast it, and Peter Pettigrew stood a few feet away looking at his own hand like even he couldn't believe what it had just done. Kill the spare. That was all it had taken. 4 words, 1 spell. And Cedric Diggory, who had shaken Harry's hand after the first task, who had told him about the egg in the bath, who had said take it together over the Triwizard Cup with a grin so genuine it made Harry feel guilty for ever suspecting him, was lying face up in the dark grass of a graveyard, eyes open, staring at nothing. Harry's knees hit the ground beside him without him deciding to kneel. Cedric, his voice came out wrong, too small. Cedric, hey, nothing, of course nothing. The killing curse didn't leave room for maybe. That was what made it the killing curse. Get up, Voldemort's voice said, and it took Harry a second to realize it was directed at Wormtail, not at him, and another second after that to realize Voldemort was already standing, upright, corporeal, draped in robes that moved wrong, his red eyes sweeping the graveyard like he was taking inventory. The resurrection ritual was finished. The rebirth was done. The worst thing Harry had ever been afraid of was standing 30 feet away in a body that hadn't existed an hour ago, and Harry was still kneeling in the dirt next to a dead boy. He forced himself to stand, not because he wasn't afraid. He was. The fear was a live thing in his chest, something that breathed and pulsed and wanted him to run, wanted him to grab the portkey and go, wanted him to do anything except stand up straight in a graveyard with you-know-who looking at him like he was an interesting problem. He stood anyway, because Cedric couldn't, and because someone had to. Harry Potter, Voldemort said, like the name was something he'd been saving, like it tasted a particular way. Remarkable, the Death Eaters had formed a circle around them by then, called up from their various corners of hiding and fear by the dark mark burning in the sky. Their faces were covered, but Harry could feel the weight of them, the circle closing, the options narrowing. His wand was in his hand, but his hand was shaking, and none of it mattered because even the greatest duelist in the world would have had trouble with those numbers, and Harry Potter was 14 years old. What followed was pain. Not the clean pain of a scraped knee or a broken bone, but something else entirely, Voldemort's wand moving in that elegant, almost casual gesture, Crucio, and Harry's whole body becoming a scream it had no voice left to make. He went down. He got up. He went down again. Each time the curse lifted it was like surfacing from black water, and each time it landed he thought this is the time I don't get up, and each time he was wrong. He didn't know how long it lasted. Long enough that the grass under his hands was wet, dew or blood, he couldn't tell anymore. Then the wands connected, priori incantatem, the golden thread. The cage of light humming between them while Voldemort's face twisted with something that wasn't quite surprise, more like the expression of a chess player who suddenly suspects his opponent has been reading from a different rulebook. The shades came, the echoes. Cedric's echo first, younger looking somehow, stepping out of Voldemort's wand with that same easy grin and saying, "Hold on, Harry and your parents are here." And then they were there too, James and Lily, barely older than Harry was now, their voices steady and warm and heartbreaking all at once. "We'll give you time," his father said. "When the connection breaks, run." Harry ran. He nearly died 3 more times between the statue of the Peveril Patriarch and the edge of the graveyard where Cedric lay. He grabbed Cedric's arm, he grabbed the portkey cup, he thought take it together one last time, and then the world turned inside out and spat him back onto the lawn of Hogwarts with the crowd cheering because they didn't know yet. They hadn't been told yet. They still thought this was a competition. He couldn't let go of Cedric's arm. Dumbledore reached him first, crouching down with that particular economy of motion that old men with great power sometimes have, and his eyes were doing the thing, the searching, scanning thing, and his voice, when it came, was very quiet and very controlled. "Harry, are you hurt? He's dead." Harry heard himself say it from very far away. "Cedric, Voldemort killed him. I tried." He stopped. There was nothing useful at the end of that sentence. The crowd had gone silent. The cheering had died the way a candle dies when you put your hand over it, sudden and complete. "Cedric," that was a man's voice, breaking open in the worst possible way, and Harry looked up to see Amos Diggory at the edge of the crowd being held back by someone, straining forward, and Harry had never in his life wished more desperately to be somewhere else. My son, that's my son. What did you do? What happened to my boy? I didn't, Harry wanted to say. I tried. I brought him back. He asked me to. He didn't say anything. He just held on. They put him in Dumbledore's office eventually. Harry didn't remember the specific sequence of events between the lawn and the chair. There had been Dumbledore and McGonagall and Moody, and a portkey that had turned out to be wrong in a way that hadn't fully processed yet, and a curse, and Snape's name said in a tone that meant fetch him, and at some point the false Moody had tried to drag Harry away, and Dumbledore had stopped it with 3 spells cast so fast Harry's eyes couldn't track them. He sat in the chair in front of the fireplace and stared at the flames. He was alone. Dumbledore had sent everyone else away, said something about medical attention in just a moment, and the office was so quiet Harry could hear the mechanical ticking of the instruments on the shelves, the small silver things that measured things he didn't know the names of. Fawkes was watching him from the perch in the corner with round, ancient eyes that didn't blink. Harry's hands were still shaking. He pressed them flat against his thighs and told them to stop, and they didn't. Cedric is dead. He let himself think it, flat and clear, the way you have to think the worst things sometimes just to make them real enough to deal with. Cedric Diggory is dead. Voldemort killed him. Voldemort is back. I watched it happen and I couldn't stop it, and I held his body all the way home. The shaking got worse. He thought about Cedric's father, the way that my boy had sounded. He thought about the echo, Cedric stepping out of the wand, younger, lighter, saying hold on, helping Harry by the seconds he needed to survive. Even in death, even as an echo, still helping. Something in Harry's chest cracked open. Not broke, cracked, like a fault line finding itself in stone. Like something that had been sealed shut, finding the edge of a door. He didn't cry. He wanted to, maybe, in some distant way. He'd never been good at it, never had anyone to cry in front of. The Dursleys had cured him of that particular instinct before he was old enough to understand what they were curing him of. So he didn't cry. He just sat with the crack in his chest and the dark behind it and Fawkes watching him with those ancient eyes and the instruments ticking and the fire burning. And then the dark behind the crack spoke, not with a voice, not exactly. More like a presence, something that had been at the outer edge of his awareness his entire life and had now stepped close enough to be felt. It was cold the way deep water is cold, not unpleasant but absolute, the kind of cold that says I have been here long before you and I will be here long after, and what you do between those 2 points is the only question that matters. Harry sat very still. The crack in his chest opened wider. Not painfully or not only painfully, like breathing after holding your breath too long, like something finally right. And then words appeared in the air in front of him, not projected outward where anyone else could see them, but in his vision, layered over the fireplace blue-white text that shimmered at the edges like it was trying to find a form his mind could process. System initializing. Host detected. Harry James Potter condition met. The Sovereign witnessed the unjust death. The door is open. Welcome, Shadow Monarch. Harry read it 3 times, then he looked at Fawkes. The Phoenix tilted his head, didn't react to the text, which meant no one else could see it. What? Harry said very quietly to the empty air. Tutorial Shadow Extraction Unlocked Tutorial. Shadow Storage Locked Tutorial. Shadow Army Locked Current Level. 1 Current Shadows. A dead soul of sufficient power remains accessible for 24 hours after death. Sovereign, there is one such soul nearby. Harry stared at the final line for a long time. One such soul nearby. He wasn't stupid. He knew exactly who it meant, and something moved through him, hot and cold at the same time, a horror and a need so tangled he couldn't separate them. He wouldn't want that, Harry said, still very quietly. The Shadow Monarch does not deal in want. The Monarch deals in choice. Cedric Diggory's soul is not imprisoned or diminished. A shadow is not a ghost. A shadow retains will, memory, personality, and skill. The choice is yours. Harry thought about Cedric's father. What happened to my boy? He thought about Cedric's echo. Hold on, Harry. He thought about all the people who were going to die in the war that had just officially started, the war that Dumbledore would manage carefully and the Ministry would deny, and that Harry was going to be standing in the middle of regardless of what anyone decided. He thought about all the ways a dead boy's skills, because Cedric was an excellent duelist, a Quidditch captain, a 6th year at the top of his year, might save someone else's life someday. He thought about asking Cedric if he wanted to. He didn't know if the system would let him ask. He decided to try anyway. The graveyard soil was still on his robes when he slipped out of Dumbledore's office. He shouldn't have been able to. There were people in the corridor. There was movement and noise and the beginning of the panic that would last all summer. But the system had given him something he hadn't expected when he'd pushed back from the chair and thought, I need to get to the hospital wing without anyone seeing me. The shadows stretched, and Harry had moved through them like they were water. He'd stopped in a broom cupboard on the third floor for 30 seconds just to understand what had happened, standing in the dark with his heart rate at something genuinely unreasonable, and the system had provided a minimal, helpful, shadow step, unlocked the monarch moves where shadows move. Distance limited by host's current level. Right, Harry had said to himself to the dark. Right, okay. The hospital wing was quiet. Madame Pomfrey had tended to him earlier. He had vague memories of that, of her hands shaking slightly while she worked, which had frightened him more than anything because Madame Pomfrey never shook, and then the chaos had pulled her out into the corridor, and she hadn't come back. Cedric's body was behind a screen in the far corner. Harry had known that with a certainty he hadn't questioned until now, a pull like a compass needle. He stood behind the screen. Cedric looked peaceful, which was its own particular cruelty. The green light didn't leave marks. It just stole the animation out of a face and left everything else exactly as it was, so you could look at someone and see how fine they were except for the wrong way they weren't breathing. Harry crouched down. "I don't know if you can hear me," he said. He kept his voice low, not out of fear of being found but out of something he couldn't name, a respect for the quiet. "The system says I can. It's hard to explain. It says you keep your memory and your will and who you are. It's not like a Horcrux or in Fairy or anything dark like that, I don't think. Or maybe it is dark, I genuinely can't tell." He paused. "What I can tell you is that Voldemort's back. People are going to die because of that. And you are better than most people at staying alive and keeping other people alive, and I could use that. But if you say no," he felt the crack in his chest pulse. The dark behind it moved. And something that felt like yes, not spoken, not even really felt, but recognized, the way you recognize someone's handwriting, moved back through the crack and found him. Harry exhaled. He pressed 2 fingers to Cedric's forehead, and the system did the rest. Shadow Extraction. Success CEDRIC Amos DIGGORY has been added to the Shadow Army. Title: Shadow General. Skills extracted: Advanced Transfiguration, Passive, Combat Dueling Active, Leadership Aura Passive, Shadow Army. 1/infinity. The body on the bed didn't change. The shadow Cedric, whatever Cedric was now, was somewhere else, somewhere the system maintained, and Harry sat on the cold hospital wing floor for a moment and tried to figure out what he felt. Not guilty. That surprised him. Sad, yes. Furious underneath the sad, in a way that had been building since the moment the green light left Peter Pettigrew's wand, and there was nothing Harry could do about it. But not guilty. "Get some rest," Harry said to the empty space where a shadow now lived. "I'll figure out how this works." "We both will." He stood up, squared his shoulders, and walked back out into the corridor. Dumbledore was standing at the end of it. The old man looked at him for a long moment, that searching look, the one Harry had never been able to read, and said nothing for long enough that Harry started to wonder if he'd been caught, if some form of magic had alerted Dumbledore to the shadow extraction, if the chess pieces had just shifted in a way Harry wasn't prepared for. Then Dumbledore said, "I was coming to find you. I'm glad you're walking under your own power." "I'm fine," Harry said. The instinct was automatic. He caught it, thought about it. "Actually, I'm not, but I'm functional." "That's different." Dumbledore's eyebrows rose slightly. The searching look deepened. "Yes," he said after a moment. "Yes, I suppose it is." They walked back to the office together, and Harry noticed, for what might have been the first time, with this new cold clarity settling over him like a coat, all the things Dumbledore didn't say. Didn't say "I'm sorry." Didn't say "this is my fault." Didn't say "I should have protected you better or believed you sooner or told you more." He said, "I need to ask you what happened tonight, Harry. Every detail." Harry told him. He told him everything about the graveyard, the ritual, the Death Eaters, the duel, the escape. He told it accurately and completely, and without breaking down. Dumbledore listened with his hands folded and his eyes closed, and when Harry finished the old man sat quietly for a moment and then began to speak about plans, about the Order, about what needed to happen next. He did not mention Cedric once. Harry noticed that too. He was back in Gryffindor Tower by 2 in the morning. The dormitory was dark. Ron and Neville and Seamus and Dean all either asleep or very deliberately pretending, and Harry lay on his back in his 4-poster with the curtains drawn and the system's interface hovering at the edge of his vision like a candle in a dark room. He thought about the year ahead. 5th year, OWLS, whatever the Ministry was going to do now that Dumbledore had confirmed Voldemort's return to anyone who'd listen, which, based on the expression on Fudge's face tonight, was going to be precisely no one. He thought about what he was now, what the system had made him, or revealed him to be. He wasn't sure which it was, and suspected it mattered. Level 1 Experience, 100 Shadows, 1 Abilities, Shadow Step LV, 1 Shadow Extraction LV, 1 available missions, daily training, complete 2 hours of physical conditioning. Reward plus 15 EXP system. Note, the Shadow Monarch does not grow by waiting. I know, Harry murmured, I know. He thought about Cedric. He thought about the crack in his chest that was no longer a crack. It was a door now, properly open, and the dark behind it wasn't absence. It wasn't grief, it was depth. It was the particular kind of power that doesn't announce itself, that doesn't shine or crackle or smell like ozone. It was the power that had been gathering in him since he was 11 months old, and a curse had found something in him it couldn't break and had shattered itself against it instead. He'd never understood what that something was. He was starting to now. He woke before dawn and went down to the empty common room and started training. Not with magic, not yet, he'd circle back to that, but with the systematic, almost furious physicality of someone who has decided that never again will his body be the limiting factor in a fight. The system had said physical conditioning, and Harry had always been wiry and quick, but not strong, not the way the situation was beginning to demand, and so he ran through every exercise he'd ever seen. On the one occasion Dudley had dragged him along to watch a boxing match at the youth center in Little Winging. He did it until his arms shook and his lungs burned, and the system's experience counter climbed in small, satisfying increments. Ron found him on the floor doing press-ups at 6 in the morning. There was a long silence. Okay, Ron said finally, sitting down on the bottom step of the dormitory stairs in his pajamas and watching Harry with the expression of someone trying very hard to appear casual about something that is very clearly not casual. So the Cedric thing, and Voldemort coming back. And whatever the you-know-what, I'm going to need about 4 more hours of sleep and a full English before I can handle any of this, but I'm here, yeah, whatever this is. Harry stopped, looked up. Ron's jaw was set, and his ears were slightly pink the way they got when he was trying to be brave about something. Yeah, Harry said, I know you are. He went back to the press-ups. Ron sat there for another 10 minutes, not saying anything, just present, and that was exactly what Harry needed, and Ron knew it, and neither of them had to say so. Hermione found him later that morning. She came in from breakfast with the kind of controlled expression that meant she'd been crying and had stopped herself and was now operating on pure determined functionality. She sat next to him in the window seat of the common room that had become, by unspoken agreement, their spot, and she said, The Daily Prophet is already running stories. Let me guess. Tragic tournament accident claims champion. She said it quietly, like the words tasted bad. They're not fudge has already, Harry, they're calling it an accident. The anger in Harry's chest was clean and familiar. I know. He's going to use every resource he has to. I know, Hermione. She stopped, looked at him. The controlled expression shifted into something more genuine, more worried. You're different, she said, not accusingly, just observationally. The same way she'd say that's not the right formula, or you've used a different technique. Harry considered lying. Then considered the fact that this was Hermione, who would figure it out eventually, and who would be significantly more difficult to deal with once she felt she'd been managed. Something happened in the graveyard, he said carefully. Not just Voldemort, something else. I can't fully explain it yet because I don't fully understand it yet, but it's not dark magic and I'm not in danger. I think it's actually, he paused, searching for the word, an advantage. She stared at him. I need you to trust me, he said, for a little while, until I can explain it properly. Can you do that? Hermione Granger, who trusted evidence and facts and demonstrable proof above almost everything else, looked at him for a very long moment. Yes, she said. But Harry, be careful. Whatever it is, just, I will be, he said. He meant it. He also thought careful was probably going to need redefining before this year was out. System notification level up condition detected. Continuous daily training for 72 hours will trigger first level advancement. Shadow Monarch, the strong do not wait to be made ready. They make themselves ready. Harry looked at the text floating at the edge of his vision. He thought about the year ahead, the ministry, the denial, whatever Dumbledore was planning without telling him, and Voldemort rebuilding, reconnecting, preparing. He thought about Cedric Diggory, somewhere in the dark of the Shadow Army, waiting. He thought about the door in his chest, open now, dark and deep in his. He thought about his parents' voices in the graveyard. Run, they'd said. When the connection breaks, run, he had. He was done running. He slipped out of the common room before lunch and found a room on the 6th floor that wasn't on the map. Or rather it was, but in that vague Marauders map way where a room that isn't used often just reads as a slightly irregular patch of empty space. He stepped inside, tested the echoes, found the shadows good and deep, and he stood in the center of the room and reached into that door in his chest and called the shadow he'd made. Cedric stepped out of the dark. He looked exactly as he had in life, Same build, same face, same clear eyes, except the color was gone, or not exactly gone but shifted. The way a photograph is different from the person in it. He looked at Harry steadily, without surprise, without distress, and then he said, "You look terrible." Harry laughed. It was the first time he'd laughed since the graveyard, and it felt raw and slightly broken and also absolutely necessary. "You look better than you should," Harry said. Cedric looked down at himself. "It's strange," he said thoughtfully, like a man commenting on unusual weather. "Not bad, just different. I remember everything. The graveyard, the cup, the way that little," he paused. "Wormtail, I remember all of it, but it doesn't hurt the way I thought it would. It just is." "The system says you're a general," Harry said. "Shadow General." "Does it?" Cedric said with the ghost of a smile. "And you're the Shadow Monarch, apparently." "Right." Cedric looked at him levelly. "Then we have work to do." The system ticked something over at the edge of Harry's vision, quiet and satisfied, and Harry squared his shoulders and thought about the war that was coming, the enemies that were coming, the year of denial and danger that stood between now and the moment when none of this could be hidden anymore. He was ready. No, he was getting ready. Which, for the first time in his life, felt like exactly the right place to start. System Update Day 1 of Shadow Monarch Protocol. Current Shadow Army 1. General Cedric Diggory. Next level 85 100 EXP abilities in development. Shadow Sense, basic shadow manifestation system. Note, every monarch was once a day one. This is yours. Outside the window, the sun was setting over the grounds of Hogwarts, burning the lake into copper and the mountains into silhouette. Somewhere below, people were crying for Cedric, and somewhere in the shadows of a room that wasn't on any useful map, two boys, one alive and one something else entirely, were beginning to plan a war. It wasn't the same as safety. It wasn't the same as peace, but it was a start, and Harry Potter had never needed anything more than a start. Chapter 2, The Year of Controlled Wolves. The Hogwarts Express ran north through rain. Harry sat with his forehead against the cool glass of the compartment window and watched the countryside blur, green fields turning gray, hedgerows stitching the edges of everything together, England looking exactly as it always had, which felt like an insult somehow. The world should have looked different. It should have had the decency to acknowledge what had changed. Instead, it just kept being fields and rain, and the occasional red-roofed farmhouse, indifferent and complete. Ron was asleep across from him, mouth slightly open, his prefect badge new shining, a subject that had briefly and awkwardly hung in the air between them back on platform 9 and 3/4 before Harry had cut it off with "You deserve it, Ron, I mean it," catching the gray light. Hermione had gone to do something prefect-related 3 carriages down and hadn't come back yet. Neville was reading something about herbology with the focused expression of a person who finds comfort in the indexing of plants. The system was quiet. It did that, went still for hours at a time, as if giving Harry room to just be a person before nudging him back toward what he was becoming. He'd leveled up twice over the summer. Level 3 now, which didn't sound like much until you compared what his body felt like in August to what it had felt like in June. He'd run every morning in the park near Privet Drive at 5 a.m. before the Dursleys were awake, and he'd trained with Cedric in shadow space every night, learning to hold the connection steady for longer and longer periods, learning what Cedric knew, the footwork for dueling, the wand movements for transfiguration that his textbooks described in 2 dimensions when the reality was 3, the way a fight actually moved versus the way it looked in theory. The Dursleys had not had a good summer. They weren't sure why. They just knew the boy in the spare room felt different this year, not cowed, not careful, not performing the particular invisible smallness that had made him easy to overlook. He ate what he wanted. He used the television when he wanted. He looked Vernon directly in the eyes when Vernon started working up to a shout, and Vernon always stopped. He didn't know why he stopped. He just did. Harry had not done anything to make them stop. He had simply stopped pretending that they had any power over him, and somehow that had been enough. Hermione came back into the compartment as the train curved north around a long, shallow hill, sat down beside Harry, opened a notebook, and said without preamble, "I have questions." "I know," Harry said. "You've been training, physically. Since I noticed in June and then over the summer when I owled you, the letters were different, shorter, more direct. Something's changed." "Something changed in the graveyard," Harry said. He'd been waiting for this conversation. He'd actually rehearsed several versions of it over the summer, which was not something he'd ever done before, and which told him a great deal about how much he needed it to go well. Hermione waited. "I don't know how to explain it in terms that map onto anything you've read," he said. "There isn't a magical theory for it. It's a system, like a framework. It gives me missions and tracks my progress, and it's helping me get stronger." She was quiet for a moment. "What kind of system?" one that chose me when Cedric died. He watched her face. I think it was always going to find me eventually. I think the graveyard was just when the conditions were right. Harry. She said his name in the voice she reserved for things she needed him to understand she was taking very seriously. That sounds like it could be dark magic, or a cursed object, or a possession of some. It's not, he said. I know it's not. The same way I knew Tom Riddle's diary was wrong from the inside. This is the opposite of that. This feels like me, but more. She wrote something in her notebook. He craned his neck and saw it said, not dark, self-amplifying, origin, cross-reference compendium of autonomous magical frameworks. He felt a wave of genuine affection for her. There's more, he said, but I need you to hear the first part properly before I say the rest. She looked up, waited. I raised Cedric. The rain hit the window. The train rocked slightly on the tracks. Neville turned a page. What? Hermione said. The conversation lasted the rest of the journey to Hogsmeade. By the time the carriages appeared, the Strals pulling them, which Harry could see now, which he filed carefully away under things to think about later, Hermione had asked 47 questions. Harry had answered 30 of them fully, deflected 12, and admitted he didn't know the answer to 5. Ron had woken up at some point during the middle of it, listened to the summary Hermione gave in a rapid undertone, looked at Harry with wide eyes and said, so Cedric's like, what, your shadow butler? And then had to dodge the book Hermione threw at him. General, Harry said. Shadow General. Right, that's less weird. Ron paused. It's still pretty weird. I know, but like, good weird. Useful weird. Ron was nodding slowly, working it out in real time the way he always did, piecing the chessboard together in his head. So when things kick off this year, and they're going to kick off, I don't care what the ministry says, it's going to be something. You're not just going in as you. You've got Cedric in your corner. And I'll keep getting stronger, Harry said. The system grows. There's no ceiling I've found yet. Ron looked out the carriage window at the darkening sky. Brilliant, he said quietly. That's actually brilliant. Then, because he was Ron, I still think Butler is funnier though. Cedric in the shadow space where he lived and waited would have laughed at that. Harry could feel it, a warmth through the connection, distant but present, like a hand on a shoulder across a crowded room. The great hall was lit with its usual hundreds of candles, the ceiling reflecting a sky full of restless clouds, and Harry sat down at the Gryffindor table and felt the shift in the room immediately. People were looking at him differently. Not the way they'd looked at him in first year, not wonder or curiosity. This was something warier. He'd said Voldemort was back and Dumbledore had confirmed it, and the ministry had called them both liars, and now, the students of Hogwarts were sitting with the particular discomfort of people who genuinely did not know which version of reality to believe. He didn't try to convince anyone of anything. He sat, he ate, he talked to Ron about Quidditch, and to Hermione about the Transfiguration reading, and to Neville about the new greenhouse varieties. He was a completely normal person having a completely normal dinner, and he was aware that this itself was a kind of answer, that a boy making up stories about the Dark Lord coming back would be performing normalcy too hard, would be desperate and loud and seeking validation, and Harry was none of those things because he simply didn't care anymore whether people believed him or not. The truth would arrive on its own schedule. He just needed to be ready when it did. Then Dumbledore stood to introduce the new staff, and the hall shifted again, a collective drawing in of breath, a change in atmospheric pressure, as a woman Harry had never seen before stood up from the staff table. She was pink. That was the first thing. Not offensively pink, not carnival pink, but the particular pink of someone who had made a very deliberate aesthetic decision and was deeply satisfied with it. Pink robes, pink cardigan, pink bow and mousy hair. A face that was set in the fixed, sweet smile of someone who has decided that serenity is a performance worth maintaining indefinitely. She looked like a birthday cake that had decided to become a bureaucrat. Harry's new shadow sense, which the system had unlocked at level 2, a low hum of information about the people around him, nothing invasive, just an awareness the way you're aware of temperature, registered something cold behind that smile. Something with edges. Professor Umbridge, Dumbledore said, will be joining us as our new defense against the dark arts teacher, sent to us by the Ministry of Magic. The Ministry's representative then, of course. How lovely, Harry said, to no one in particular in the flattest possible voice. Ron snorted into his pumpkin juice. Her class confirmed it on the first day. Theory only. No practical magic. No defense that was actually defensive. A textbook written by someone Harry had never heard of, who seemed to believe that the primary threat to young wizards was insufficient respect for ministry regulatory frameworks. Umbridge sat at the front of the classroom in her pink cardigan and spoke about progress and learning appropriate techniques and the careful distinction between classroom study and real-world application, as though the latter were something to be kept behind a firmly locked door and visited only by authorized adults. Lavender Brown asked if they'd be practicing the shield charm. Umbridge smiled the smile. The Ministry has determined that students at your level have no need for combat magic. Harry's quill stopped moving. With respect, he said, and his voice was calm, completely calm, the kind of calm that had nothing to do with deference and everything to do with certainty. Students at my level have met Voldemort 3 times. I'd say combat magic is fairly relevant. The room went very still. Umbridge's smile didn't waver. I would remind you, Mr. Potter, that the educational guidelines clearly state. I've read the educational guidelines, Harry said. They're written by people who haven't been in a graveyard lately. Someone at the back of the room made a sound that was not quite a laugh. Umbridge picked up her quill. Detention, Mr. Potter, tomorrow evening. 5 o'clock, the smile got wider, which was somehow worse than if it had narrowed. I do find that a quiet evening of reflection works wonders for students who struggle with boundaries. Looking forward to it, Harry said. He turned back to his textbook. The system noted in small clean text at the edge of his vision. Mission generated. Survive Umbridge's first detention without revealing abilities reward. Plus 30 EXP, Shadow Sense LV. 2 without revealing abilities. He almost smiled at that. He had no intention of revealing anything. Not yet. The detention started with the quill. He'd heard about it secondhand before he'd experienced it. Hermione had cross-referenced the specific enchantment after the second session, when Harry came back with his right hand slightly more healed than it should have been, the system having apparently decided that its monarch's physical well-being was worth accelerating. Blood quill, she'd said, white-faced. That's Harry. That's a banned instrument. That's classified as a dark object. Madame Pomfrey would have to, you need to report. To who? Harry had said. She'd stopped. He'd watched the answer land. Dumbledore was managing his information carefully. The Ministry was Umbridge. McGonagall was bound by the system she worked within. To me then, Hermione had said, you report it to me and we figure it out together. So that was what they did. She documented everything, dates, times, the exact phrasing of Umbridge's statements in class, the marks on Harry's hand, cross-referenced against the education decree numbers being posted on the notice boards one by one. She built a case meticulous and thorough, the kind of case that would mean something eventually, and Harry let her because it was useful, and because it was Hermione's way of fighting, and fighting her way was how she stayed sane. Harry's way was different. His way was the 7th floor. The room of requirement had revealed itself on a Tuesday in October, when Harry was walking past the stretch of blank wall with Neville and thinking, with intense focus, I need a place to teach people, and the door had appeared between one step and the next like it had simply been waiting for someone to finally ask the right question. He stood inside it for a moment before he told anyone else. Just stood in the space it had become, high ceilings, dueling mats, a wall of equipment and reference materials, the exact dimensions of what he would have designed if he designed it from scratch, and he pressed one hand flat against the wall and said quietly, thank you. The room didn't answer. It didn't need to, he told Hermione and Ron that night. The Defense Association, Hermione had proposed Dumbledore's Army as the name, which Harry had actually liked, partly for the cheek of it, filled up faster than he'd expected. Word moved through the school in that particular teenage information network way that couldn't be controlled or fully traced, and by the time they held the first proper meeting in the room of requirement, they had nearly 30 students, a mix of years and houses, all sitting or standing in various configurations of nervous and determined. Harry stood at the front of the room and looked at them. He'd thought about what to say. He'd prepared something, a kind of explanation, a rationale, a laying out of what he thought they needed to learn. Then he'd scrapped it, because prepared speeches sounded like prepared speeches, and what these people needed wasn't a speech. Umbridge is teaching you that theory is the same as preparation, he said. It's not, you all know that, you're here because you know that. He paused. So let's start with where you actually are. He split them into pairs, and had them run through the disarming charm, which most of them thought they knew. What became immediately apparent was the gap between knowing how to perform a spell and knowing how to perform it under pressure with someone firing back. The room was noise and concentration and occasional laughter, and Harry moved between the pairs, adjusting wand angles, commenting on footwork, saying again and now do it faster and good, but what if they move left? He'd learned from Cedric that dueling was 3-dimensional, and most of the textbook guidance was 2. He passed that on. He'd learned from the system that your body was a weapon before your wand was, that strength and endurance and reflexes weren't separate from magical ability but foundational to it. He passed that on too. By the end of the first session, people who had never been particularly confident were disarming each other with real conviction. Neville, who had spent 4 years being told in various ways that he wasn't quite good enough, got off a reducto that cracked one of the stone practice targets clean in half and stared at his wand like he'd never properly seen it before. "That was always in you," Harry told him. "You just needed someone to stop telling you it wasn't." Neville went red. Then he squared up and did it again. Cedric was with him most evenings after that. Not physically manifested, Harry had learned to feel the connection without summoning him into the physical space, could feel the shadow presence at the edge of his awareness like a second heartbeat. Sometimes he manifested Cedric fully in the room of requirement after the others had gone, and they'd run through scenarios, Harry attacking, Cedric defending, then reversing, then both at full speed. Cedric was a problem to duel. In life he'd been exceptional. As a shadow he was, that plus all the time Harry had given him to simply practice, without the limitations of a body. He moved through spells with an efficiency that was almost architectural, no wasted motion, every block and counter placed like a carefully considered word. "You're telegraphing your left shoulder when you're setting up a reducto," Cedric said one evening, catching Harry's disarming charm on a conjured shield and stepping inside the follow-through so quickly Harry barely had time to register the movement before the practice wand was at his throat. "Every time." "I know," Harry said, mildly breathless. "I'm trying to lean into it, make it a feint." Cedric considered this. "That could work if your actual follow-through is fast enough." He lowered the practice wand. "It's not currently. But it could be." "Thanks," Harry said. "Very encouraging. You asked me to train you properly, not to be nice to you." Cedric's shadow eyes had that calm steadiness Harry had come to rely on. "Nice doesn't keep people alive." "No," Harry agreed. "It really doesn't." They ran the scenario again. November arrived with Educational Decree 24, which banned all student clubs and organizations not approved by Umbridge, which was Umbridge's way of saying she'd heard about the DA without being able to prove it yet, which was fine, because the DA had Hermione's ward system on the room of requirement and a parchment agreement with a loyalty jinx that Harry had genuinely mixed feelings about but that Hermione had argued was a necessary operational security measure, and that Fred and George had called vicious with deep approval. The notice board was covered in educational decrees now, a pink-bordered column of them on the right side, increasingly specific, increasingly intrusive. Students could not form groups of more than 3 without approval. Prefects had expanded powers. All correspondence in and out of the school was subject to review. Harry read them each time a new one appeared and filed them carefully alongside his growing picture of what Umbridge was actually doing, which was not simply enforcing ministry policy. She was building something, centralizing control, positioning herself as the authority in this school over and above Dumbledore, and doing it piece by piece, each piece small enough to accept, the cumulative effect enormous. "She's not stupid," Harry said to Hermione, one evening in the library when they were ostensibly doing potions homework. Hermione looked up. "Number, she's not. She's doing it exactly the right way. Each decree on its own is just a rule. Nobody's going to riot over a single rule. But in 6 months, she'll have restructured the school's authority chain entirely," Hermione finished. "Dumbledore will be figurehead at best." Harry tapped his quill against the table. "So what does she want? Not the ministry, what does she want?" Hermione was quiet for a moment. "Power," she said finally, "but not the kind that wants to destroy things, the kind that wants to order things. She believes, I think genuinely believes, that the problem with the wizarding world is insufficient control. Not enough rules, not followed rigorously enough by not enough people." She paused. "She's probably been watching everything she sees as chaos her entire career, and the ministry gave her a wand to aim at it." "And we're the chaos," Harry said. "You specifically," Hermione said in a tone that was almost gentle. "You saying Voldemort is back is the single greatest threat to her framework. If you're right, everything she's building is meaningless, so you have to be wrong. She needs you to be wrong." Harry thought about that. He thought about the neat, terrible logic of it, that Umbridge was not cruel for cruelty's sake, but cruel in the service of an order she genuinely believed in, that she would do anything, hurt anyone, to maintain the fiction of stability. It didn't make him angrier, it made him colder. "Right," he said. "Potions." Hermione blinked. "What? We're doing potions homework. I'm doing it. Give me the parchment." She stared at him for a moment and then, shaking her head slightly, passed it across. The system leveled him up twice more before December. Level 4 came with something new, an ability the system called Ruler's Authority, described in its minimal way as a command that compels movement from shadow entities within range. Harry had tested it carefully. alone in the room of requirement, discovering that it worked on magical creatures as well as shadows. He'd cornered a flobberworm in the herbology corridor on a dare to himself, and found that a quiet internal stop had frozen it in place like a spell, except with no wand and no sound. He didn't tell anyone about that one yet, even Hermione. Some things needed more testing before they became part of the conversation. Level 5 came with an upgrade to Shadow Step. The range extended, the speed increased, and most significantly, the ability to bring one other person through the shadow space with him. He tested that with Ron in an empty classroom on a Sunday afternoon, and Ron's face afterward was an expression Harry wished he could bottle, half delighted, half genuinely unsettled, the particular expression of someone who has had the laws of physics explained to them very directly. "That was horrible," Ron said when they reappeared in the corridor outside the Great Hall. "That was like being swallowed. Too fast." "No, it was. Well, yes, but also, can we do it again?" They did it twice more. By the third time, Ron was grinning. System notification: new shadow available for extraction. A being of significant magical power has died near Hogwarts boundary. Soul accessible for 18 hours. Classification: magical creature. DEMENTOR. Harry stared at the notification for a long moment in his dormitory bed at 2 in the morning. A Dementor. The Ministry had positioned them at the school's entrances at the start of term, ostensibly for security, actually in the way everything the Ministry did was actually for surveillance and intimidation. One had apparently died. He didn't know how. It didn't matter how. He thought about a shadow army that included a Dementor. He thought about what a Dementor's abilities would look like transferred into a shadow, the Dementor's kiss, the soul-consuming cold, the despair. He thought about what it would mean to have that at his command. Then he thought about Cedric, who was his general and his first, and who was still Cedric, still dry-humored and clear-eyed, and who cared about what they were building and why. Could you say the same of a Dementor? Would whatever the system extracted retain the Dementor's essential nature? He asked the system. Query: shadow personality retention for non-sentient entities. Response: non-sentient entities become bound weapons. Sentient entities retain personality. Classification: Dementors are borderline. The shadow will retain the ability set but reduced autonomy. It will obey without complexity. Without complexity. Harry lay back against his pillow and stared at the ceiling. A weapon with no complexity in a war against a man who used people as weapons, that felt like a short road to becoming the thing he was fighting. He knew that with a certainty that didn't need the system to explain it. Sovereign's choice. The system does not compel. Pass, Harry said quietly to the dark ceiling. The notification faded. He fell asleep thinking about Neville cracking the practice target in half and the look on his face afterward, and the DA getting better every week, and Cedric's footwork drills, and the particular pink of Umbridge's cardigan when she'd written, "I must not tell lies," across his hand like a brand. He thought about all the things he was building and all the things that were building against him, and he felt the weight of it not as a burden but as a load he'd chosen to carry, which was a different thing entirely. Somewhere outside the castle, it had started to snow. The year pressed forward. 2 weeks before the Christmas holidays, the Ministry raised the Ministry Oversight Act. Fudge gave a press conference that described Albus Dumbledore as confused and perhaps experiencing the effects of advancing age, and the Daily Prophet ran a photo of Harry on the front page above a caption that read, "Potter's Lies, 1 year on. Why experts say the Chosen One is dangerous." Harry bought a copy, read it over breakfast with an expression of complete neutrality, and handed it to Ron. "Keep it," he said. "When this is all over, it'll be worth something. Like an artifact of colossal stupidity," Ron said. "Exactly." The DA met that evening, 32 members now. Harry walked through the door of the room of requirement and looked at the room full of people who had shown up, week after week, to learn to fight in a class that told them they didn't need to, and he felt something shift in his chest. Not the system, not the door to the shadows, but something older and simpler and fully his own. This, he thought, this is what I'm fighting for, not the prophecy. Not the scar on his forehead or the title the prophet kept assigning and then snatching back. Not even against Voldemort in the immediate sense. For this, the room full of people learning to protect themselves, Neville's cracked practice target, Ron's grin after the shadow step, Hermione's notebook filling with evidence, Ginny Weasley in the corner learning a bat bogey hex with focused intensity, Luna Lovegood practicing the Patronus with an expression of serene concentration, as if she'd been expecting a silvery animal to emerge from her wand and was simply waiting for it to arrive. "Patronuses tonight," Harry said. "I want everyone working on them." They're the only thing that works against Dementors, and the Ministry has put Dementors at the gates, which tells you everything you need to know about what the Ministry thinks of your safety." He walked to the center of the room. Around him, 32 wands came up. "Think of the best thing you have," he said. "Not the happiest memory. The best thing, the thing that makes you most certain the dark isn't permanent." He raised his own wand. The system was quiet. The shadows were still. And in the silver light of 32 patronesses finding their shapes, the year turned toward whatever was coming, and Harry stood in the middle of it, unafraid, patient, and absolutely ready. Chapter 3: What happens when you push back? The blood quill had left marks that didn't fully fade. Harry noticed it one morning in January when he was washing his hands before breakfast, the faint ridge of scar tissue across the back of his right hand, pale against his skin. "I must not tell lies" in letters barely visible unless you knew to look. He ran his thumb over it once, the way you test a healed burn to see if it still hurt. It didn't hurt. That wasn't the point. The point was that it had happened at all. That Umbridge had done it with the satisfaction of someone tidying a desk, and the Ministry had sanctioned it, and Dumbledore had not stopped it, and it had gone on for months because Harry had been operating on the assumption that patience was strategy. Let her think she was winning. Keep the DA running quietly, keep leveling, keep building. Don't hand her a reason to escalate. He dried his hands and looked at himself in the mirror above the bathroom sink. The face that looked back was not the face of a boy who was going to wait much longer. The immediate cause was Marietta Edgecombe, but the real cause was something older and stupider than one frightened girl making a terrible decision. It happened on a Thursday in late January, fast the way disasters are always fast once the groundwork is laid. Harry was in charms when the DA coin in his pocket went cold, not the warm pulse that meant meeting tonight, but a sudden flat drop in temperature that meant something was wrong. He was out of his seat before he'd fully processed what he was doing, Flitwick's startled voice behind him saying "Mr. Potter," and then he was in the corridor and the system was already showing him. Alert, Shadow Sense triggered location, 7th floor corridor, room of requirement threat level, authority intrusion, multiple magical signatures detected, Ministry classification he didn't run. Running created noise and drew attention, and he'd learned from 2 months of Shadow Step that fast didn't always mean running. He took the back stairs, slipped through the 3rd floor shortcut behind the tapestry, and came out on the 7th floor in time to see the tail end of what had already happened. Umbridge was there with 4 teachers, Filch flanking her with his ring of keys clutched to his chest like a trophy, and a cluster of frightened students being herded out of the room of requirement by 2 members of what Harry now recognized as the Inquisitorial Squad, the name Umbridge had given to the group of students she'd recruited as informants and minor enforcers. Draco Malfoy stood near the door looking extremely pleased with himself. Marietta Edgecombe was at the back of the group, her face covered by her hands, and even at this distance Harry could see the word sneak in boils across her forehead, Hermione's jinx having delivered exactly as designed. He counted 17 of his people. Not all 32, the others hadn't been there, but 17, including Neville and Ginny and Luna, and several 4th years who'd only joined the DA in November. Umbridge hadn't noticed Harry yet. She was speaking to Filch in a low, satisfied voice, something about informing the minister and Dumbledore's involvement, and Draco was looking at the captured students with an expression Harry recognized as the specific pleasure of someone who has wanted to win something for a long time and has finally managed it by means that didn't require being good at anything. Harry stepped out from the staircase landing. "Let them go," he said. 17 heads turned toward him. Umbridge turned last, and her expression when she completed the turn was the one Harry had come to understand best, not surprised, not alarmed, not even angry in the conventional sense, but satisfied like a trap she'd set had finally been stepped in. "Mr. Potter," she said with a smile, "how fortunate you've arrived. I was wondering when the leader of this little illegal organization would show himself." "They haven't done anything wrong," Harry said. He walked toward the group, not fast, not aggressive, just steadily closing the distance. "Learning defensive magic isn't illegal. Your educational decree banned unauthorized clubs. You'd have to prove we were a club. I have a witness who has provided a full account. You have a scared girl who told you what you wanted to hear." He stopped about 10 feet from Umbridge, close enough that she had to look up at him. She wasn't tall, and close enough that the 4 teachers with her had to decide whether they were going to physically stop him, which was a decision none of them appeared eager to make. "You've been building to this all year. Now you've got 17 students in the corridor and a reason to drag Dumbledore into it, and you think that's a win." "It is a win, Mr. Potter," Umbridge said. "Dumbledore will be removed from Dumbledore's not the one you should be worried about, Harry said. Smile flickered, just slightly. Just for a moment, it was enough. Detenti, no, Harry said. The word came out flat and simple and left no grammatical room for anything to follow it. Not defiant, not performative. Just no, the way you'd say no to a mispronounced word, corrective, cert. The corridor was very quiet. Umbridge's smile had fully stopped. Underneath it was the face Harry had suspected, tight, careful, cold. I beg your pardon. You won't be giving me detention, Harry said. I've sat through your detentions. I've used your blood quill. I still showed up to every class, did every assignment, didn't report you to anyone even though what you were doing is classified as the use of a dark object on a minor. He paused. I've been patient with you. I'm done being patient. Neville, somewhere in the cluster of students, made a small sound that might have been a laugh swallowed quickly. You are threatening a ministry representative, Umbridge said, and her voice had gone low and careful. I'm telling you the situation, Harry said. There's a difference. The situation is that you can take those 17 students to Dumbledore and escalate this, and whatever happens next will not go the way you're expecting it to. Or you can let them go back to class, and I'll let you carry on pretending you have any actual authority in this building. Draco said. He can't. Nobody's talking to you, Harry said, without looking at him, and Draco went quiet in a way that seemed to surprise even Draco. Umbridge was still for a moment. The 4 teachers were very carefully not making eye contact with anyone. Filch was looking at Harry with the expression of a man recalibrating something important. You will regret this, Mr. Potter, Umbridge said. Probably, Harry agreed. Let them go. She let them go. Not because she was afraid of him, or not only because of that. Harry understood her well enough now to know she would be running calculations. What does escalating this cost me right now versus what do I gain? If she pushed and Dumbledore backed Harry, she'd lose ground. If she escalated to the minister and it turned into a public incident before she was ready, she'd lose the narrative. Better to step back, document, wait for cleaner circumstances. Harry understood that and was already accounting for it. Her stepping back wasn't surrender, it was tactical. But the 17 students walked to class free, and in the corridor afterward, with just Hermione and Ron and Neville, Harry stood against the wall and let out a long, slow breath. That was brilliant, Neville said, with the dazed energy of someone who's just watched someone else do something he'd been wanting to do for months. That was also a very short clock on whatever retaliation she's planning. Hermione said immediately, her notebook already open, quill already moving. She'll go to Dumbledore today, tonight at the latest. I know, Harry said. And Dumbledore will handle it the way he handles everything, Harry said, by absorbing it, taking the blame. Redirecting attention. He'll probably tell her the DA was his idea and let himself take the fall for it. Hermione looked up from the notebook. You think he'd do that? I think he's been doing things like that our entire time here and calling it protection. Harry pushed off the wall. Come on, we've got transfiguration. Ron fell into step beside him. She's not going to let that hallway moment go, he said quietly. No, Harry agreed. She's going to come back harder, that's fine. Is it? Harry thought about the door in his chest. The shadow army that was growing, 3 members now, Cedric and 2 magical creatures he'd pulled from the Forbidden Forest after they'd died naturally, a great spider and a hippogriff that the system had classified as scout and cavalry respectively. He thought about level 5 and the way his magic had started to feel different recently, fuller, more immediate, like the difference between speaking normally and speaking with your whole chest. She can come back as hard as she wants, he said. It won't be enough. Dumbledore called him to the office that evening. Harry went, sat down across from the enormous desk, declined the offered lemon sherbet, and waited. Dumbledore looked at him for a moment, the searching look, the weighing, and then he did something unexpected. He leaned back in his chair and steepled his fingers and said, Tell me what's changed. Harry met his eyes. What do you mean? I mean that the boy who returned from the Triwizard Tournament was grieving and angry, and very much the same boy I've known since he was 11. The student I'm looking at now is... Dumbledore paused, choosing words with his usual precision. Something has shifted, fundamentally. I've been training, Harry said. More than that, Harry considered. He thought about how much to give Dumbledore, and he thought about the blood quill scar, and about Cedric's father's voice, and about the 17 students being marched out of the room of requirement. He thought about all the ways Dumbledore's caution had cost things it shouldn't have cost. I'm stronger than I was, Harry said. Stronger than you think I am, and I'm getting stronger. He held Dumbledore's gaze. That's what's changed. Harry, Professor. He said it without heat, without aggression, just firmly. Whatever you were going to say next, whatever warning or caution or reminder about the bigger picture, I've heard it. You've said versions of it my entire time here, and I understand why you say it. He paused. But the bigger picture includes people like Cedric dying because Voldemort had 4 years to consolidate power while we were being careful. So I'm going to be less careful than you'd like. That's just what's going to happen. The silence in the office was not the silence of someone preparing a rebuttal. It was the silence of someone genuinely listening. What are you asking me for? Dumbledore said, finally. Time, Harry said, and space. That's all. I'm not going to do anything that puts anyone in danger, not real danger. But Umbridge is going to come at me again, and I'm going to respond, and I need you to not step in the way. Dumbledore was quiet for a long time. Outside the window, the grounds were dark, the lamps along the path to Hagrid's hut small warm points in the black. I will endeavor, Dumbledore said slowly, to trust in what you're telling me. That's all I'm asking, Harry said. He stood up, nodded once, and left. In the corridor outside the gargoyle, the system ticked. Mission complete. Maintain operational honesty with Dumbledore without full disclosure reward, plus 40 EXP level up. Level 6 new ability unlocked, Shadow Manifestation LV. 1. Monarch may partially manifest shadows in physical space. Duration, limited by host stamina. Harry read it as he walked back to Gryffindor Tower. Shadow Manifestation. He'd been waiting for that one. He thought about what it meant in practical terms and smiled to himself in the dark corridor. Not the wide-open grin he saved for Ron's jokes and Quidditch wins, but the smaller, sharper smile that was becoming increasingly characteristic of a boy who had very few surprises left in his chest, but was extremely well-armed with strategy. He tested Shadow Manifestation the next morning. The room of requirement. Empty. Just Harry and the connection to Cedric at the edge of his awareness, and the system watching in its quiet, efficient way. He reached into the door in his chest. He still thought of it that way, always would, and pulled. Cedric stepped into the physical space of the room. He was there, fully physically there, not translucent, not the half-visible shimmer Harry had half expected, but present, casting a shadow of his own, his feet actually connecting with the mat beneath them. The only thing that was different from life was the quality of his color, like a photograph taken on slightly different film stock, everything accurate and slightly off at once. Cedric looked down at himself, flexed his fingers, looked up. Well, he said, that's new. You can interact with the physical space, Harry said. Move things. Cast spells, probably. I don't know yet if your wand will work. Cedric picked up one of the practice wands from the rack against the wall. He turned it between his fingers. He pointed it at the nearest practice dummy and said clearly, Expelliarmus. The dummy's arm, which was holding a practice wand of its own, snapped outward and the wand flew across the room. They looked at each other. Right, Cedric said, so we can train properly now. We can do a lot more than train, Harry said. Umbridge's retaliation came in early February, and it came in the form of Educational Decree 29, which gave the Hogwarts High Inquisitor, a title that had appeared alongside Umbridge's name on the staff board, with no announcement and no explanation, the authority to dismiss any teacher whose conduct was deemed contrary to the ministry's educational framework. Within the week, 3 teachers had received formal warnings. McGonagall's had been delivered in front of her class, which was the kind of strategic insult designed to humiliate as much as to threaten. Trelawney was dismissed entirely, reduced to tearful collapse on the entrance hall steps with her enormous collection of crystal balls and sherry bottles. Every student in range witnessed to it, Umbridge watching the scene with that smile, like she was cutting something out of the school's fabric, and was pleased with the cleanliness of the cut. Dumbledore reinstated Trelawney with quiet authority and replaced her divination classes with a centaur named Firenze, which was the most elegant piece of institutional chess Harry had seen the man execute, but none of it stopped the warnings, or the decree, or the inquisitorial squad tightening like a noose around the school's daily life. Harry watched all of it and calculated. The DA continued. He was more careful about it now. Hermione had reworked the ward scheme, added an additional layer of misdirection around the 7th floor corridor, and they varied the timing so no pattern was obvious. 30 members now, growing steadily, their skill growing faster than that. Neville could produce a corporeal patronus, a round, cheerful-looking thing that Harry suspected was a toad, but who was going to tell Neville that? Ginny was developing into something remarkable, fast, and instinctive, her reductor curse leaving craters in the practice targets. Luna, for reasons no one could fully explain, was simply very hard to hit, moving with a loose-limbed vagueness that turned out to be genuinely difficult to track. He was proud of them. He didn't say it that way. He wasn't sure he had the words for it, but he felt it. The breaking point arrived on a Wednesday. Harry came back from morning training. He'd taken to the grounds at 5 a.m. now, running the perimeter of the lake in the dark, shadow step drills along the tree line, and found a small crowd of students near the Gryffindor common room, gathered around a notice that had been pinned to the wall outside the portrait hole. He read it once. Then he turned and went to find Hermione. She met him on the stairs with the expression he'd started calling her "I've already read it" face. "Umbridge has dissolved the DA retrospectively," she said before he opened his mouth. "Educational Decree 32. Anyone who has participated in what she's calling the Potter Study Group is required to present themselves to her office by end of day 4. She's calling it a compliance interview." "A compliance interview," Harry repeated, "with the inquisitorial squad present. No teacher oversight." Hermione's voice was very controlled. "Harry, if she gets 30 of our members into that office." "She won't," Harry said. "The decree is mandatory if they don't go." "Nobody is going," Harry said. "Not one of them. Not because I'm telling them not to, because when I'm finished this morning they won't need to." Hermione looked at him carefully. "What are you planning?" "I'm going to her office," Harry said, "right now, and I'm going to make it very clear that if there are compliance interviews to be had, the only person she'll be interviewing is me, Harry, and I'm bringing Cedric." The silence on the staircase was a particular kind of heavy. "She won't, she'll have no idea what she's looking at," Hermione said slowly. "No," Harry agreed, "she won't." Umbridge's office was on the 3rd floor, and it was aggressively pink, which Harry had heard about secondhand, but experiencing it directly was something else. Plates with moving kittens covering every wall, everything lace-edged and china pink, the overwhelming impression of someone who had decided their aesthetic was going to function as armor. He knocked, was told come in the sweetest possible voice, and stepped through the door. The office was not empty. Draco Malfoy was there with 4 other inquisitorial squad members along the wall. Umbridge was behind her desk. And sitting in the corner, which Harry hadn't expected, was a man in ministry robes, a functionary of some kind, mid-30s, with the carefully blank face of someone who had been sent to observe and document. Harry looked around the room, then he looked at Umbridge. 30 students, he said. "That's what the decree is targeting. Mr. Potter, I'm glad you've come to. I'm here to tell you that none of them are coming." He sat down, uninvited, in the chair across from her desk. "I'll answer your questions. They won't. The decree requires compliance from students found to be participating in an unauthorized organization." Harry crossed his arms. "But if the organization doesn't exist, if there's no evidence it ever existed except for the word of one informant, then there's nothing to comply with. We have the testimony of Miss Edgecombe, who violated the confidentiality agreement she signed, which had a jinx on it, which activated, which you can see on her face." He paused. "She told you people met in the room of requirement. She can't tell you what they did there because she was jinxed before she could. So what you have is students who may have been in a room together. That's it." The ministry functionary in the corner made a small note. Umbridge's smile was doing complicated things. "You are remarkably." "I'm going to make you an offer," Harry said. "One offer: you withdraw the compliance interviews, all of them, and I'll let this particular conversation end here." "You're making offers to me," Umbridge said. The smile had completely dropped now, and underneath it was the real thing, cold, controlled, precise. "You are a 15-year-old student. You have no authority in this, Cedric," Harry said. The shadow stepped out of the dark behind Harry's chair. Later, Hermione would ask him to describe Umbridge's face at that moment, and Harry would say, "I don't have the vocabulary for it," and that would be true. The ministry functionary knocked his chair back 2 feet. 4 inquisitorial squad members made various involuntary sounds. Draco went the specific color of old chalk. Cedric stood in the lamplight of the pink office like a fact, solid, steady, with that characteristic ease that had survived death entirely intact. He looked at the room with mild interest and then looked at Umbridge specifically. "Hello," Cedric said pleasantly. Umbridge's mouth was open. No sound was coming out. "This is Cedric Diggory," Harry said. "You probably remember him. He died in June, at the Triwizard Tournament, the one the Ministry is currently calling an accident." He let that sit for a moment. "He's here because he'd like to be. And because I thought it was important for everyone in this room to understand clearly what it is they're dealing with." The Ministry functionary had found his voice. "That is classified as there are regulations regarding the raising of the dead, the use of." "He's a shadow," Harry said. "A willing shadow. Not an inferius, not a ghost, not any category your regulations currently cover." He looked at Umbridge. "So here's the question. You can escalate this, go to the minister, bring in magical law enforcement, turn this into an investigation. And when that investigation starts, the first thing it'll examine is whether what I am actually falls under any existing law. My legal team," he paused, noting Hermione would love being called that, "believes it doesn't. What it will do is bring a lot of attention to the Ministry's position on Voldemort's return, which is currently denial. The name had the usual effect, but he'd said it calmly enough that the effect was more impact than panic. Alternatively, Harry continued, you withdraw the compliance interviews, nobody bothers anyone else, and we all continue as we are. Umbridge was staring at Cedric. Cedric met her gaze with complete serenity. Your choice, Harry said. The compliance interviews were quietly withdrawn by noon. There was no announcement, no explanation. The notice was simply removed from the wall outside Gryffindor Tower and replaced by nothing. Harry heard about it from Ginny, who came to find him in the library with barely concealed astonishment, and then from Neville, who could not stop looking at Harry with the expression of a person who has just discovered something important about the nature of reality. Did you threaten her? Neville asked. I made her an offer, Harry said. That sounds exactly like a threat. Then I made her a threat, Harry said, but politely. Ron, when he heard, sat very still for a moment and then said, I need you to know that I'm going to be thinking about Draco Malfoy's face when Cedric appeared for the rest of my life. I wish you'd been there, Harry said honestly. Me too, mate, me too. The fallout was not nothing. Umbridge was furious, not loudly furious, which would have been easier to read, but the quiet, architectural kind of furious that reorganized itself into new plans. A letter went to the Ministry that afternoon, Harry knew, because the system's shadow sense picked up the Ministry owl leaving from the owlery and flagged it. He didn't intercept it. There was no point. Let Fudge read whatever she'd written. Let the Ministry marshal whatever response they were going to marshal. Every move they made in the open was a move Harry could see. What he was more worried about was what he couldn't see. He sat in the room of requirement that evening. The others had gone. The session had been shorter than usual given the tension in the castle, and he sat on the mat in the empty room with Cedric across from him, and the system quiet and the world outside muffled by the stone walls, and he let himself think honestly about what was coming. Voldemort was building. He could feel it in the way he could feel weather, not specifically, not clearly, but as a pressure in the air, a quality of anticipation. The scar had been burning intermittently since September, and he'd been controlling the connection, shutting down the channel the way you'd close a door, not wanting Voldemort in his head, and equally not wanting his head accessed. The system helped with that, creating something like a barrier, not impenetrable, but present. What worried him was not being caught off guard. The war was out there past the castle walls, and he was in here getting stronger but not yet strong enough, and every week of relative safety was borrowed time. He's going to try something before summer, Harry said. Cedric, who had been practicing wandless magic, a new experiment, going slowly, looked up. The Ministry. Voldemort, he's patient but not infinitely patient, and Dumbledore is the only obstacle between him and everything he wants, so at some point he's going to try to remove Dumbledore, and the most elegant way to do that is to give him a reason to leave the school. Harry paused. Or give me a reason to leave it. Through you, Cedric said. Through your connection. Through people I care about, Harry said. That's always been how it works. That's how he operates. He goes around. Cedric was quiet for a moment. Then the answer is to be ready to move when it comes. Not to prevent it, you can't prevent it, just to be ready. Yeah, Harry said, I know. He looked at the system's interface at the edge of his vision. Level 6. Shadows, 3. An army that was growing, abilities that were developing, a school full of people who were getting better at surviving, and a year that was turning faster now, picking up speed, pointing toward whatever was at the end of it. He reached into the door in his chest. He felt Cedric there and the spider shadow he'd named Scout, and the hippogriff he hadn't named because it had felt strange to rename something that had been its own thing before. He felt the cold depth of the shadow realm, vast and patient. He was not afraid of it. That was the thing he'd learned this year, really. Not the spells or the shadow step or the way to stand in front of Umbridge and not flinch. The real thing he'd learned was that the dark was not the enemy. The dark was just the dark. What you brought into it was up to you. He'd brought Cedric. He'd bring more before this was over. And whatever came at him, Umbridge, the Ministry, Voldemort, the weight of a prophecy, and a war and a world that couldn't decide whether to believe him, it would find a Shadow Monarch waiting on the other side. Ready, patient. And absolutely done being careful. Outside, in the dark of the grounds, the forbidden forest stood old and deep, and full of things that moved in the spaces between trees. Something in there looked toward the castle. Something old, very old, that had been in that forest since before Hogwarts had walls, and felt the shift in what lived inside them and went still. The system made no note of it. Not yet. Chapter 4. The Department of Mysteries. The vision came on a Tuesday night in June. Harry was in the middle of a training session, room of requirement, Cedric running him through high-speed dueling sequences that had stopped being comfortable around level 4 and had become genuinely punishing at level 6, when the scar opened like a fault line and the connection rushed in before he could close it. He didn't fall. That was the first thing he noticed afterward, that he'd stayed upright. 6 months ago, the visions had dropped him like a cut string. Now he rode it the way you ride a wave, not fighting it, not surrendering to it, just staying conscious underneath it and watching. The Department of Mysteries, a long corridor, doors on every side, the circular room that spun. And then a room with a stone archway in the center, a veil hanging in it, moving slightly in air that had no source, and Sirius standing at the base of it with his hands bound behind him, his face cut, his expression defiant even now, and Voldemort standing to one side with the particular stillness of someone who has already decided what is going to happen next. Harry closed the connection. He was breathing hard. Cedric had crossed to him, had felt it through the bond, probably, or simply seen Harry's face, and was close but not touching, giving him space to come back. Sirius, Harry said. He's got Sirius, Department of Mysteries. Cedric looked at him steadily. How long? Now Harry was already moving. It's happening now. He had 40 seconds in the corridor outside the room of requirement, which was exactly how long it took to make 3 decisions. First, this was a trap, he knew that. Voldemort had constructed the vision specifically for Harry, designed it with full knowledge of Harry's connection to Sirius, and Sirius might be real or might be a constructed image, and either way the Ministry's headquarters was exactly the kind of controlled environment Voldemort would choose for a confrontation. Second, he was not going alone. Third, he was not going unprepared. He turned back through the door. I need you in physical space, he told Cedric. Full manifestation, full duration. Can you hold it? Yes, Cedric said. You're going to be visible to everyone. There's no way around that. I know. People who knew you are going to, Harry. Cedric's voice was quiet and absolute. I know, let's go. He found Ron and Hermione in the common room first, which was luck, and Neville, Ginny, and Luna coming down the stairs behind them, which was something else, fate, maybe, or simply the particular gravitational pull of people who had been preparing for exactly this kind of moment. He said it fast. Sirius, Department of Mysteries, trap, going anyway. Hermione opened her mouth. Not a discussion, Harry said, not harshly, just clearly. I'm going. I need you to decide in the next 30 seconds whether you're coming. 5 people looked at him. Then Ron said, obviously, and that was that. The problem of getting to London was solved in 20 minutes, and it was Ginny who solved it, which surprised no one who'd been paying attention to Ginny Weasley this year. The Strals, she said. They're in the forest. They respond to Harry now, don't they? The system confirmed this, briefly. Ruler's authority, effective range includes magical creatures within 300 meters. The Strals, 4 available, Hogwarts grounds. They went out through the back and across the grounds in the dark, moving fast and low, Shadow step carrying Harry and Ron the last 100 meters when the shadow of the greenhouses stretched long enough, and the Strals came when Harry reached out through the ruler's authority, not compelled, not controlled, just invited, and they came the way animals come to someone they trust. Luna, to absolutely no one's surprise, was entirely comfortable with the Strals. They're beautiful, she said, in her usual tone of mild observation, stroking the neck of the one she'd mounted. You can see them? Harry asked. Oh yes. I've seen them since my mother died. She settled herself as though this were a perfectly ordinary conversation about a perfectly ordinary mode of transport. Shall we go? They went. The flight was 20 minutes of cold air and the lights of England unreeling below them and Harry running calculations the entire time. He counted his assets. Level 6, nearly 7. The experience bar had been ticking up all week. 4 shadows, Cedric, Scout, the hippogriff he'd been calling Buckbeak in his head because it was easier, and a 4th edition from 2 weeks ago, a young acromantula from the Forbidden Forest, Shadow rank Assault, whose 8 legs and venom made it something Harry devoutly hoped Voldemort was not expecting. He'd named that one Fred. He thought the twins would appreciate it someday. He thought about the Department of Mysteries. What he knew about it, which wasn't much, the layout from the vision, the circular entry room with the spinning walls, multiple doors leading to different chambers. A prophecy room, which was presumably where Voldemort wanted him to go. The veil room, which was where Sirius was. He thought about Voldemort being there personally. Every other time Harry had met Voldemort, it had been reactive. The Mirror of Eris, the Chamber of Secrets, the Graveyard. He'd survived through luck and love and spite and priori incantatum, and none of those things were strategy. Tonight was going to be different. Tonight he was arriving with an army and a plan. When we get in, he said, over the rush of air, Hermione and Neville take the entry room and hold it. That's our exit, no matter what, that stays open. Understood, Hermione said from two the strails over. Ron and Ginny move with me through the secondary chambers. Luna, he paused. Something the system had flagged that morning surfaced now, the way Luna moved in the DA, that loose unhittable quality. Luna, you're with Cedric. Luna, who had been told about Cedric the week before with the same calm acceptance she applied to Nargles and dirigible plums, simply nodded. If Voldemort is there, Ron said. What do we? He's mine, Harry said. Nobody else engages him directly. You keep his Death Eaters occupied and you stay alive. Harry, Ginny started. I'm not being arrogant, he said. I'm being accurate. I've been preparing for exactly this. Let me do it. Nobody argued. The lights of London appeared ahead, vast and scattered, the city enormous from above. The Ministry of Magic at midnight was emptied down to skeleton security, and the skeleton security was asleep or absent or already handled by the time Harry's group came down through the phone booth entrance. The atrium was cavernous and dark, the gold statues looming, the fountain still and silent. Their footsteps rang on marble. Cedric was in full physical manifestation beside Harry, solid and quiet. The others had seen him, briefly, outside the room of requirement when Harry had introduced the concept, but seeing him in the ministry atrium, in the dark, with a purpose, that was different. Ron kept glancing sideways at him with an expression that was trying to settle between amazing and extremely unsettling. Cedric noticed. I know, he said to Ron without being asked. Sorry, Ron said. I'm not, it's fine, Cedric said. I'd stare too. They took the lift down, level 9, the Department of Mysteries. The door at the end of the corridor was unremarkable, plain, unlocked, which told Harry exactly what kind of trap this was. An open door is an invitation. It said come in, said you're expected, said we have arranged the room for your arrival. Harry pushed it open and led his group inside without hesitating, because the only thing more dangerous than walking into a trap was letting the trap arrange itself further while you stood outside second-guessing. The circular room with 12 doors, the walls that could spin to disorient. Harry looked at it for 3 seconds and then looked at the system. Shadow Sense active magical signatures detected. 12, position behind 5 doors primary target detected. Level 9, Chamber of the Veil hostage signature. Positive, soul present, alive Sirius was real, not a construct. That mattered. Hermione Neville here, Harry said. The walls may spin. If they do, the door back to the lift is the third from the left of where we came in. Don't let them move you. Hermione had already pulled her wand. Neville's wand was up, his face set in the expression Harry recognized as his I'm frightened and I'm going anyway face, which was Neville's particular form of bravery and which Harry had come to trust completely. Chamber of the Veil, Harry told Ron and Ginny. Follow me. He pulled the correct door open, third on the right, the system's directional sense steering him true, and then they were moving through corridors and chambers. The Hall of Prophecy with its towering shelves of glowing spheres, the Time Room with its bell jar and its strange de-aged hummingbird circling and circling, and then the door at the far end of the Time Room, and Harry opened it and they were in. The Chamber of the Veil. Stone steps descending in tiers to the pit at the center, and in the pit the archway, ancient, massive, the veil moving in its impossible non-existent breeze. The whispers that came from it were real, something that wasn't quite voices, and Harry recognized with a chill he immediately processed and set aside that the whispers were in some way familiar, the way the Shadow Realm was familiar. Not the same, adjacent. Sirius was there. He was bound to one of the stone pillars at the pit's base, his hands behind him, his face roughed up but his eyes furious and alive, doing the particular Sirius black thing of looking outraged and defiant even while physically restrained. He saw Harry and his expression went through relief and then immediately to horror. Harry, it's a trap, you have to. I know, Harry said. He was already descending the steps. The Death Eaters came out of the shadows around the chamber's edges, not 8, not 10, but 12, stepping into the light in their masks, wands raised. And in the center, between the archway and the pillar where Sirius was bound, stood Bellatrix Lestrange without a mask, because Bellatrix Lestrange had never cared about hiding. She looked at Harry with those burning wild eyes and said, "The little boy came to play." "Bellatrix," Harry said. He kept moving down the steps. "I need you to free him. And then I need everyone in this room to stand down." She laughed. It was the kind of laugh that lived at the outer edge of sanity, bright and genuine and completely untethered from anything normal. 12 wands, little boy. You and your school friends, do the counting for yourself." "I did," Harry said. "I brought 12 too." The shadows came out of the dark. Cedric was first, stepping through the shadow space behind Harry and manifesting at the pit's edge. Then the hippogriff, vast, the shadow version of it filling the air over the pit's center with the slow beat of wings. Scout the spider, clicking down the stone tiers on the right side of the chamber with the particular patient speed that large spiders have. And Fred the acromantula, descending from the ceiling on a thread no one had noticed, 8 eyes reflecting the light, directly over the heads of the 3 Death Eaters positioned in the rear. 2 of those 3 Death Eaters took one look upward and broke position. Just slightly, just a step back, but position discipline gone was position discipline gone. Then Cedric spoke across the pit to Bellatrix directly. "You killed me," he said pleasantly, "or you were there when I was killed." "I'm not entirely sure of the distinction." He tilted his head. "I'd like you to know that I'm doing very well, considering." Bellatrix's burning eyes moved between Harry and Cedric, and the shadows spreading through the chamber with the expression of someone recalculating, which for Bellatrix was a visible process. You could see the numbers moving behind her eyes. "What is that?" she said, and for a moment she sounded less like herself and more like a person genuinely encountering something for which she had no framework. "Shadow Army," Harry said. He'd reached the pit's floor. He was 20 feet from Sirius. "You've heard of the Shadow Monarch. You probably haven't. It's a fairly new development." He held up his wand. "Last offer," he said. "Let him go." Bellatrix leveled her wand at Sirius's head. "Come any closer and Ron's reducto hit the pillar 2 feet above Sirius's head, blowing a chunk of stone outward. Not because it was aimed at Bellatrix, it was aimed at the binding around Sirius's wrists. The stone exploded, the magical binding unraveled along with it, and Sirius tore himself free with the energy of someone who had been waiting for exactly that opportunity. "That's my boy," Sirius said, to no one in particular, and picked up a dropped wand from the floor. The room detonated. What followed was not a battle in the clean sense. It was the specific chaos of 12 Death Eaters and 6 students, and 4 shadows in a circular stone chamber with an impossible archway at its center and everyone moving at once. Harry had thought about this moment. He'd thought about it since January, since the first time he'd properly understood that the Department of Mysteries was a likely target, and what he'd thought was, you can't plan every detail. You plan the shape of it and trust your people for the details. The shape of it was, isolate Bellatrix, control the chamber, don't let anyone near the veil. The details were Ron catching 2 Death Eaters with a stunning sequence that he'd been practicing since October, and that dropped both of them simultaneously. Ginny moving through the fight with that instinctive speed, ducking and returning fire with a ferocity that was entirely characteristic. Luna, on the upper tiers with Cedric, doing something with a confundus charm that she must have modified somehow, because it hit 3 targets in a chain that Harry hadn't known was possible. Sirius freed, absolutely feral with the particular energy of someone who has been waiting years and years for permission to fight, dueling 2 Death Eaters at once with a grin like it was the best thing that had happened to him in recent memory. And Harry moving through it toward Bellatrix. She was good. He'd known she was good. She was Voldemort's most devoted, most decorated, had survived Azkaban with her magic intact and her intensity amplified. She threw spells with the abandon of someone who'd stopped caring about precision and bet everything on power and speed, and her power was real, her speed was real. Harry didn't go toe-to-toe with it. The system had been teaching him something for 6 months that no textbook covered. The most powerful duelist in a room isn't the one with the most firepower. It's the one who controls the space. He used Shadow Step twice in quick succession, the shadows of the chamber thick and plentiful appearing left of where she was aiming and then immediately right, forcing her to track him across 2 repositions in under a second. And on the 3rd repositioning he came up from below her eyeline. She was still looking right and said Expelliarmus from point blank. Her wand hit the stone floor. She stared at him. For a full second that wild burning look calculating and recalculating and coming up with nothing. "Accio," she said wandlessly, and her wand jumped back to her hand. She had wandless magic, which Harry had not fully accounted for but had suspected, and she cast Crucio before the wand was fully in her grip. He'd felt the Cruciatus curse before, in the graveyard. He knew its shape, the total, invasive wrongness of it, pain that used your own nervous system against you. The system absorbed some of it, not all, not even most, but some. He went to one knee. He got back up. Bellatrix looked at him with what might have been, on someone else, something close to respect. "You should have stayed down," she said. "I never stay down," Harry said. He reached into the door in his chest and called Cedric. Cedric hit Bellatrix from the left while Harry hit her from the right, their spells, a binding charm and a stunner, crossing in the air above the pit and landing at angles she couldn't dodge simultaneously. She blocked one. The other caught her across the shoulder and spun her sideways, and Harry's Petrificus Totalis landed while she was mid-rotation, and Bellatrix Lestrange hit the ground rigid. The chamber had gone quiet. 11 Death Eaters down, bound, or fled. The 12th, the one who'd run when Fred appeared on the ceiling, was presumably still running somewhere in the ministry. Harry's people were standing, all of them. Sirius was bleeding from a cut across his forehead, but moving with complete freedom, standing at the base of the pit with his wand raised and his chest heaving and his expression somewhere between exhilarated and overwhelmed. Then the temperature dropped. It dropped the way temperature drops in the presence of something old and absolute, not quickly, not gradually, but completely, as if the warmth in the chamber had been a decision that was now being reversed. Every shadow in the room deepened. The veil stirred in the archway without wind. Harry turned around. Voldemort was standing at the top of the stone tiers. He had not been in the chamber before. He was here now. The entry must have been through the veil room itself or through a different access point. It didn't matter how. He was here, tall and pale and wrong in the way that felt ancient even though the body was less than a year old. Red eyes moving across the chamber with the expression of someone doing very thorough accounting. The chamber went still the way chambers go still when the most dangerous thing in them has just arrived. Voldemort looked at the 12 fallen Death Eaters. He looked at Bellatrix, rigid on the floor. He looked at Harry's people, Ron, Ginny, Luna, Sirius, all unhurt, all standing, all with their wands out. He looked at Cedric. Interesting, Voldemort said. I thought you'd think so, Harry said. He was already moving, ascending the tiers toward Voldemort, which was not what Voldemort had expected. The red eyes tracked him with something that recalibrated on the fly. He'd expected Harry to hold his position. Hold your position in the presence of superior power was the instinct, and Voldemort had spent so long dealing with Harry's instinct that he'd perhaps forgotten Harry had been systematically retraining his instincts since June. Harry reached the top tier and they were 20 feet apart, eye level, and Harry looked at Voldemort without the usual white noise scream of adrenaline that had characterized their previous meetings. There was adrenaline, there would always be adrenaline. He wasn't made of stone, but it was the useful kind, the kind that sharpened rather than scattered. You came, Voldemort said. I wasn't certain you would. You used Sirius, Harry said. You knew I would, and yet you arrived prepared. The red eyes moved to Cedric again. Diggory, the boy I killed to test a resurrection potion. A pause that was almost thoughtful. You raised him. He asked me to, Harry said. Did he? Voldemort's tone was not quite disbelieving, not quite anything recognizable. What are you, Harry? Something new, Harry said. Something you don't have a counter to yet. Voldemort raised his wand. Harry had thought about this too, about what priori incantatem had meant. The wands were brothers, the killing curse and his own wand's last spell connecting in a way that bypassed normal magical combat. He didn't intend to let that happen again, didn't intend to let Voldemort maneuver him into another locked wand situation. So when Voldemort moved, Harry didn't raise his own wand, he raised his hand. Ruler's authority had always been described by the system as a command that compelled movement in shadow entities. What Harry had discovered at level 6 was that it did something else too, something the system's minimal descriptions had not fully captured. It exerted will. Raw, directed, unfiltered will, the same quality that lived in the door in his chest, the same thing that had made an 11-month-old child the only being in history to survive the killing curse. Not magic in the technical sense. Something before magic, something that magic had developed to describe. Voldemort's killing curse hit the ruler's authority and slowed, not stopped. Not immediately. It slowed the way a thrown stone slows when it hits deep water, still moving, still lethal, but meeting something that had density and will of its own. Harry stepped sideways and it passed him. The chamber behind him, stone wall, exploded where it hit. Voldemort looked at his own wand with an expression that was almost the twin of the one he'd worn in the graveyard, when the wands had locked. The expression of a chess player who has found a piece on the board that does not move according to any rule he has memorized. That shouldn't be possible, Voldemort said. A lot of things about me shouldn't be, Harry said. You know that better than anyone. He reached into the door in his chest and pushed everything he had through the ruler's authority, not as an attack, not as a weapon, but as a declaration. As the thing it actually was, the will of the Shadow Monarch, absolute and unborrowed and entirely his own. He pushed it into the space between them and watched it hit Voldemort the way weather hits a coastline, not destroying, not yet, but present, undeniable. Voldemort took one step back. It was barely visible. It would have been invisible to anyone not watching for it, but Harry saw it and Voldemort knew he saw it. This isn't over, Voldemort said. His voice had not changed, still cold, still precise, still every inch the Dark Lord, but something underneath it had some minor structural element giving way. No, Harry agreed. It isn't, but tonight it is. Voldemort looked at the fallen Death Eaters one more time. He looked at Bellatrix, still rigid on the floor, and something moved across his face that was as close as Harry suspected Tom Riddle could get to grief, Bellatrix as his most devoted, Bellatrix his weapon and his mirror. Then Voldemort turned, walked to the veil, and was gone. The Ministry arrived 11 minutes later. Fudge himself, which Harry had not quite expected, and a full squad of Aurors, and 3 senior Ministry officials, and they came through the doors of the Chamber of the Veil and stopped in collective shocked silence at what they found. 12 Death Eaters bound or stunned on the chamber floor, including Bellatrix Lestrange, including Lucius Malfoy, including 4 names from Azkaban's most wanted list. 6 students and 1 escaped prisoner standing at the pit's base, all alive. 1 shadow manifested in full, standing beside Harry Potter with the specific face that certain people in this room had last seen alive in June. Fudge looked at Harry, looked at the Death Eaters, looked at Cedric, looked at Harry again. "He's back," Fudge said. It came out small and hollow. "He's Voldemort." "Yes," Harry said. "He was here 20 minutes ago. He's gone now." He paused. "I've been saying this since June, Minister." Fudge's face did something complicated. A year's worth of denial and political maneuvering and careful construction crumbling in real time, right there in the Chamber of the Veil, in the face of 12 bound Death Eaters and a 15-year-old boy looking at him without any anger at all, just this steady, implacable certainty. Fudge started. "You'll want to arrest them before they wake up," Harry said, gesturing to the Death Eaters. "And Sirius Black is innocent. He was framed by Peter Pettigrew, who is alive and currently in Voldemort's service, which I've also been saying since 3rd year." He looked at the Auror squad. "Would someone free Bellatrix's petrification? She'll need to be transported to Azkaban properly." One of the Aurors, a tall woman with close-cropped hair who had been watching Harry with the expression of someone filing things away very carefully, moved to comply. Sirius appeared at Harry's shoulder. "Not bad," he said in an undertone. "How's your head?" Harry asked. "Bleeding. Fantastic. Best night I've had in 15 years. Sirius looked around the chamber with bright eyes. "Albeit a very low bar." Harry almost smiled. Then Fudge was speaking to him again, something about official statements and ministry protocol, and Harry turned to face it, because the fight was over but the aftermath was its own kind of battle, and he was prepared for that too. They were back at Hogwarts by 4 in the morning. The castle was dark and still. They came through the entrance doors, and the castle received them the way it always did, warmed, solid, indifferent in the best possible way to what had happened outside its walls. Ron's shoulder had a burn from a clipping hex that Madame Pomfrey would need to look at. Ginny had a cut across her cheek. Luna had lost her shoes somewhere in the time room and was walking on cold stone in bare feet without apparent complaint. They were alive, all of them. Harry stood in the entrance hall for a moment before the others moved toward the stairs, and he let Cedric's manifestation release, felt the shadow settle back into the realm, still present in the connection, just resting. He felt the hippogriff retract. Scout and Fred folded back into the dark. He stood in the entrance hall alone for 30 seconds. The system updated. Mission complete. Protect all members. Department of Mysteries bonus condition. No allied deaths reward. Plus 200 EXP level up. Level 7 new shadow slot unlocked. New ability unlocked. Shadow Domain LV. 1. Within a defined area, the monarch's control of shadows becomes absolute. Duration and area increase with level. System note, the monarch stood against the darkest power in the land tonight and made it step back. Record that. Harry read the last line twice. Record that. He exhaled. He looked up at the stone ceiling of the entrance hall, at the dark, at the castle around him that had been his home since he was 11, and that had never quite felt like it until this year, until the room of requirement, and the DA and 30 people learning to stand up. "I will," he said quietly. Then he followed his friends up the stairs, and Hogwarts held its dark and steady breath around them, and somewhere in the shadows at the edge of everything, a door stood open into something vast and patient and entirely his. Chapter 5. The Shape of a War. The Daily Prophet ran 12 pages on it. Harry read them over breakfast the morning after they got back, still running on 3 hours of sleep, and the particular hollow clarity that follows extreme adrenaline, and he read every word because you always read what was being said about you even when, especially when, you already knew the truth was different. The coverage was extraordinary in the specific way that journalism becomes extraordinary when it has to reverse itself completely while pretending it never took a position in the first place. Dark Lord confirmed returned. Minister Fudge witnesses evidence firsthand. 12 Death EATRS apprehended in ministry battle. Bellatrix LESTRNGE are recaptured. AZKABAN escape ends. Potter, I've been saying this since June. That last one made Ron laugh so hard he choked on his pumpkin juice. The detail that every article mentioned, but none of them knew how to frame, was Cedric. 3 separate reporters had described him differently: magical construct, enchanted double, unknown entity, because none of them had a category that fit, and journalism, Harry had observed, dealt very badly with things that didn't fit categories. The ministry functionary who'd been in Umbridge's office in February had apparently given a statement about witnessing an unprecedented magical phenomenon and recommending further study, which was bureaucratic language, for I have no idea what I saw. Dumbledore sat at the staff table reading the same papers, with an expression Harry couldn't fully read from across the Great Hall. McGonagall beside him was reading with the expression of someone who has been vindicated so thoroughly that satisfaction and fury have become indistinguishable. Umbridge's chair was empty. It had been empty since early morning, when the news broke that the minister, having spent a long night in the ministry, watching Harry Potter and his friends dismantle 12 Death Eaters in the Department of Mysteries, had quietly removed her from her position as Hogwarts High Inquisitor and recalled her to the ministry for what the statement described as reassignment to a domestic regulatory role, which everyone understood meant a desk in a corridor, somewhere reviewing potion manufacturer licensing applications. Every educational decree on the notice boards had been taken down by the time breakfast started. The pink was gone. The castle felt like a held breath finally let out. Neville came and sat next to Harry, put a plate of toast down between them and said nothing for a moment. Then, "She's really gone. She's really gone," Harry confirmed. Neville picked up a piece of toast. "I keep waiting for it to feel different." "It will," Harry said. "Give it a day." By lunch it felt different. The corridors had a different texture, something looser, something that moved more freely. Students who had been quietly navigating the inquisitorial squad's presence for months walked to class without the sideways glance wariness that had become habitual. The inquisitorial squad itself had dissolved with impressive speed. Draco Malfoy was conspicuously absent from all common spaces, apparently having decided that a low profile was advisable given that his father was currently in ministry custody awaiting trial. Harry noticed his absence and felt nothing about it. Draco was a future problem. Today had enough of its own. Dumbledore called him to the office at 3 in the afternoon. Harry went expecting the searching look, and the careful words, and the measured revelations that Dumbledore rationed out like they were finite. What he got instead was the old man sitting behind his desk looking genuinely tired, not the performative weariness of someone managing a difficult conversation, but actually tired, the way people look when something they'd been propping up for a long time has finally given way. "Sit down, Harry," Dumbledore said. Harry sat. "I owe you an apology," Dumbledore said. Harry waited. Several, in fact. "I have treated you this year as someone to be managed rather than someone to be trusted, and the events of last night have demonstrated, rather conclusively, that my judgment in this area has been—" He paused, and his choice of the next word seemed genuinely effortful, "wrong." Harry looked at him. "Why?" he said. "Why did you manage me?" Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. "Because I was afraid," he said, "of several things, of what Voldemort might see through your connection if I gave you too much information, of what you might do with power I didn't fully understand, and," another pause, this one heavier, "of losing you. You are the subject of a prophecy that places you at the center of the war's resolution, and my instinct has been to protect the piece on the board that cannot be replaced, which is not." His voice was very measured, how one should think about a person. "No," Harry said, "it isn't. You went to the Department of Mysteries without telling me." "I did, and everyone came back." "Everyone came back," Harry confirmed. Dumbledore leaned back. He looked at Harry with the searching look, but it was different now, less like an examination and more like an honest attempt to see clearly. "The Shadow Monarch," Dumbledore said. "I have been researching it since June. There is very little in any library I have access to that describes what you are. What I have found suggests it is extraordinarily rare, perhaps unique in our world. A power that exists at the boundary between life and death and chooses a sovereign of its own accord. It chose me when Cedric died," Harry said. "Yes," Dumbledore's expression was complicated. "I have thought about that a great deal. The choosing, the system, as you call it, appears to have recognized something in you that I should perhaps have recognized sooner myself." Harry didn't fill the silence. He'd learned that silence was sometimes a room that needed to stay empty. "I would like," Dumbledore said finally, "to work with you, not around you, not managing you, with you if you'll allow it." Harry considered this. He thought about Cedric and the department and Voldemort taking that one step back. He thought about Sirius, who was currently at Grimmauld Place, legally free for the first time in over a decade, officially exonerated in an emergency hearing that Fudge had rushed through at 2 in the morning, while 12 Death Eaters were still being processed. He thought about the war that was no longer deniable, and that was going to demand something from everyone in the months ahead. "I'll allow it," Harry said, "but I need you to stop deciding what I should and shouldn't know, all of it. The prophecy, the Horcruxes, whatever you've been building toward telling me, tell me now." Dumbledore looked at him. Something in the old man's face settled, like a decision being made. "Very well," he said. The conversation lasted 2 hours. He did not go back to the Dursleys. This was not a negotiation, and Harry had not framed it as one. On the last day of term, he walked to Dumbledore's office with his trunk packed and his owl cage empty. Hedwig was already en route to Grimmauld Place, and told Dumbledore that he would be spending the summer with Sirius. The blood protection that the Dursley house provided had been, according to the system, redundant since level 4. Whatever ancient magic lived in his mother's sacrifice had been folded into the door in his chest, and was now part of him rather than tethered to a location. He explained this clearly and without asking permission. Dumbledore considered it for approximately 30 seconds and said yes. The Order of the Phoenix was not as pleased. Grimmauld Place in late June was order meetings and coded arguments, and the specific smell of a house that had been closed up too long and was being coaxed back into habitation by Molly Weasley with a determination that bordered on architectural. The house elf creature was sullen and obstructive in the way of creatures whose loyalties had been assigned rather than chosen, and Harry dealt with him on the second day by crouching down to eye level in the kitchen and saying, very quietly and very directly, "I know you loved Sirius's brother. I know you think this family abandoned everything Regulus believed in. I'm not asking you to be happy about any of it. I'm asking you to work with me, and I'm asking because Regulus died trying to destroy a Horcrux, which means he died opposing Voldemort, which means he and I want the same thing." Creature had stared at him with enormous eyes for a long moment. "How did you know about Master Regulus?" he said. "Dumbledore told me," Harry said, "and I need to find the rest of them." That was the beginning of an unlikely and extremely productive partnership. The Order meetings were something else. He sat through 3 before he understood the full shape of what he was dealing with. The Order of the Phoenix was composed of capable, courageous people who had been fighting Voldemort for decades, and who had developed, over those decades, a very specific culture of careful secrecy and top-down information management. Dumbledore told them what they needed to know. They acted on it. Questions were allowed, but the fundamental structure, Dumbledore decides, Order executes, was not. Harry sat in the corner of the kitchen through the 3rd meeting and listened to Moody briefing on Voldemort's suspected movements and Lupin discussing potential recruitment targets and Tonks reporting on ministry restructuring, and when there was a pause he said, "He's going to go for the Giants first." The room looked at him. "He did it last time," Harry said. "Hagrid told me about the First War. Voldemort had giant allies. He's going to do it again, and if we don't get there first." "That's actually in consideration," Moody said, studying Harry with his magical eye in a way that felt uncomfortably thorough. "We have a mission planned. Send Hagrid," Harry said, "and someone Hagrid trusts who also understands political negotiation. Lupin, probably." He paused. "Hagrid has a half-giant's rapport with them. Lupin understands what it means to be classified as dangerous. They'll respond to that." There was a silence. Lupin was looking at Harry with the expression he'd had since 2nd year when Harry had done something that made Lupin revise a mental category. "That's," Lupin started. "He's right," Moody said. "No preamble, no qualification. That's the right call." Molly Weasley from the stove said nothing, which was its own comment. Harry looked at Dumbledore. Dumbledore was watching him with an expression that was, unmistakably, satisfaction. The mission to the Giants went out the following week with Hagrid and Lupin. He trained every morning. 5 a.m., the back garden of Grimmauld Place, small, walled, overlooked by nothing useful, and he ran through everything the system assigned, and everything Cedric gave him, and everything he'd developed himself over the past year. The system's missions had become more complex at level 7, not just physical conditioning but tactical exercises, shadow coordination drills, exercises in holding multiple simultaneous commands across his shadow army while performing other tasks. Because the Shadow Army was growing. It was Creature, unexpectedly, who helped with the next edition. On a gray July morning, Creature appeared in the garden while Harry was mid-drill and set a cup of tea on the garden wall and said, without preamble, "There is a creature in the cellar. Has been there since Master Regulus's time. It died 3 days ago. It is still accessible." Harry looked at him. What kind of creature? Creature's enormous eyes were steady. A nundu, he said. Master Regulus acquired it, kept it here for research. It was old when Master Regulus had it and it died of age. Harry set his training wand down. A nundu was an East African creature, enormous, leopard-like, its breath capable of spreading disease. Classified as the most dangerous creature in the world by certain magical authorities, the most lethal non-human magical beast in existence. He went to the cellar. Shadow extraction available, NUNDU classification, apex predator magical creature skills, pestilential breath active, shadow stealth passive, enhanced speed passive, shadow rank, sovereign guard. Warning, this entity is of exceptional power. Extraction will require significant host stamina. Sovereign guard, that was a new rank, above general. Harry looked at the system notification and looked at the creature in the cellar, which was enormous even in death, 8 feet at the shoulder, its spotted coat still carrying the particular quality of something that had been alive very recently. He did the extraction. It cost him more than any previous one. He sat on the cellar floor for 10 minutes afterward with his head between his knees, while the system ran something that felt like a repair across his magical core. Creature brought more tea without being asked. When he stood up, the connection to the nundu was different from the others. Deeper, more presence. When he reached for it, it felt like putting your hand into a current rather than reaching for a held object. The nundu's will was vast and old and not quite tame, and it didn't respond the way Cedric did or even the way the acromantula did. It responded the way the Shadow Realm itself responded, absolute in its compliance, absolute in its power, carrying the weight of something that had never been anything other than apex. Right, Harry said to the empty cellar. I'll call you Regulus. The system leveled him up 3 times in July. Level 8 came with an extended shadow domain. He could now hold a defined area of approximately 30 meters in which his control of shadow was total, entry and exit trackable, movements within visible to him. Level 9 extended shadow step to allow 2 passengers simultaneously. Level 10, which came on the last day of July, his birthday, which he noted with a dry appreciation for the system's sense of occasion, came with something the system called Shadow Monarch's Aura. Shadow Monarch's Aura, LV. 1. Passive ability. The Monarch's presence exerts ambient pressure on hostile intent within range. Creatures and humans of lesser will experience involuntary hesitation. Effect scales with host's power and conviction. Note, this ability has been active since level 3. You are only now noticing it. Harry read the last line twice and then thought about Umbridge's flickering smile in the corridor, and Vernon Dursley stopping mid-shout, and the way the 12 Death Eaters in the Department of Mysteries had broken position when the shadows appeared. He thought about Voldemort taking that step back. You are only now noticing it. Of course, he said to the air. Hermione came to stay in the second week of August. She arrived at the front door of Grimmauld Place with 2 trunks and a look of someone who had spent 6 weeks in deep research and was ready to share findings. And within an hour she was at the kitchen table with Creature, who had accepted her presence with an equanimity that surprised everyone except Harry, going through everything Harry had told her about the system in methodical detail, cross-referencing it against 17 books she'd brought and 4 she'd borrowed from Dumbledore's personal library. I've been calling it a sovereign system, she said on the second day, because the closest analog in existing magical theory is the concept of sovereign magic, magic that is intrinsic to the individual rather than learned or externally conferred, like your mother's sacrifice, like the Elder Wand's allegiance. It responds to will and sacrifice and genuine connection, not technique. That matches, Harry said. What's interesting is the shadow component. The Shadow Realm isn't a new concept. There are references to it in pre-classical magical texts as the space between endings, which is very unhelpfully poetic, but seems to mean the state between death and whatever comes after. Most magical traditions acknowledge it exists but have no method of access. She paused. You are the access point. The system chose you as the access point. Because of what happened when I was 11 months old, Harry said. Because of what you did when you were 11 months old, Hermione said. There's a difference. The killing curse hit something in you that the system recognized. Not a coincidence. Not luck. Harry thought about this. He thought about his mother's voice in the graveyard echo, "We'll give you time," and about the door in his chest, and about Cedric saying you were always going to be something the world had no name for. What about the Horcruxes? He said. Hermione's expression shifted, the research focus going slightly sideways. Dumbledore's told you. All of it, the locket, the cup, the diadem, Nagini, the ring. He paused, and me. The kitchen was very quiet. He told you, Hermione said carefully. He told me, there's a piece of Voldemort's soul in my scar. He said it with the flatness of something he'd had 6 weeks to process. The system has been keeping it contained. Whatever the Shadow Realm is, it doesn't coexist comfortably with Horcrux fragments. I can feel it when I reach into the door. There's a resistance around the scar. Something the system is actively managing. Hermione was very still. Harry. I don't think I have to die, Harry said. I don't think that's how it ends, but I wanted to tell you because you were going to figure it out eventually and I'd rather you knew from me. She didn't speak for a moment. Then she said, we'll figure it out together, with the particular Hermione certainty that didn't allow for alternatives, and Harry felt something in his chest that was separate from the door, older and simpler and completely human. Yeah, he said, we will. Ron arrived 2 days later, took one look at the research spread across the kitchen table, said, right, what are we burning down, and sat down and started reading. He was better at this than he let people assume. Always had been, the chess player's eye, the ability to see the whole board, track the pieces, understand how one movement 2 turns ago mattered now. He picked up Hermione's framework for the Horcruxes inside an hour, asked 3 questions that reframed 2 of her conclusions, and by evening had mapped the likely locations of the remaining objects with a logic that made Hermione stop and say, I hadn't thought of it that way. Ron looked extremely satisfied about that. They worked through the night sometimes, the 3 of them around the kitchen table, with Creature occasionally appearing to refill things, and the work was genuinely good, not just preparation, but the specific pleasure of people who trusted each other completely doing something difficult together. Harry noticed it and valued it in the careful way he valued all the things he wanted to fight for. Voldemort moved in August, not toward them directly, that would come, but not yet. He moved against the magical community's infrastructure, the way someone dismantles load-bearing walls before bringing a building down. A ministry official was killed, very publicly. The magical creature liaison office was burned. 3 Muggle-born families were attacked. The message was layered and deliberate. I am here, I am real, your protections failed, and you have no one who can stop me. Harry read the Aura reports. Sirius had contacts. Tonks passed information through informal channels, and he understood the message clearly. Voldemort was not moving toward a final confrontation yet. He was softening the ground. Creating fear, creating division, undermining the public's willingness to resist before the resistance was fully organized. He was also, Harry suspected, watching. The Department of Mysteries had told Voldemort something. The step backward, the interesting, Voldemort had left that encounter with information Harry needed to account for. He knew now that Harry had the system. He didn't know its full scope, didn't know the full Shadow Army, didn't know level 10 and what it could do. But he knew the broad outlines, and he was smart enough to build strategy around incomplete information. He'll try to neutralize me before the final battle. Not kill. Voldemort's obsession with Harry was too personal for straightforward assassination, and there was still the prophecies wording holding some irrational purchase on him. Neutralize, isolate, remove. Harry sat with this for 2 days and then brought it to the Order meeting. He laid it out clearly, with the chess player's logic he'd borrowed from Ron and the strategic framework he'd built over 12 months of training. Voldemort's likely targets, the timing, the probable method. He proposed countermeasures, specific Aura deployments, Order positioning, a communication network that didn't rely on owls, which could be intercepted. The Order listened with an attentiveness that was different from the first meeting he'd spoken in. Moody was nodding before Harry was halfway through. Lupin had a quill out. Dumbledore sat very still with his hands folded and his eyes closed and the expression of someone who is genuinely listening rather than waiting for his turn. When Harry finished, Moody said, "That's the best threat analysis I've heard since the First War. I've had good teachers," Harry said. "Which ones?" "All of them," Harry said, "but mostly bad luck." Cedric came to him 2 nights before the end of summer. Not because Harry called him, the connection pulsed, and Harry recognized it as Cedric asking rather than Harry summoning, which was still relatively new, the Shadow Army developing its own interiority in ways the system had mentioned but not fully described. He was sitting on the roof of Grimmauld Place, a habit he'd developed, the roof being accessible through a 3rd-floor window and providing the clearest sky in central London, and he reached back through the connection and Cedric was there, solid in the shadow space, his voice arriving through the bond rather than in physical space. "You're thinking about the Horcrux in the scar. Can you hear that?" Harry asked, to the air. "Not the content, the quality. You've been sitting differently for a week." Harry looked at the London sky, orange-gray with light pollution, nothing like the Hogwarts sky. "Dumbledore thinks I'll need to face it eventually, that the Horcrux will have to be removed. He's not sure how, he's researching. And the system. Harry reached into the door and felt the resistance around the scar, the system's buffer, the cold management of something it didn't want inside its monarch. He'd felt it every day since he understood what it was. The system is keeping it contained, but contained isn't resolved. What does Hermione think? That there's a way that doesn't require me to die. She's not sure what it is yet, but he almost smiled, extremely certain it exists, which usually means it does. Then trust that. A pause in the bond. Harry, the year you've built, the people you've trained, the army you've raised, the work you've done. Don't go into the final fight thinking it costs you everything. Go into it knowing it might cost you something and worth it anyway. Harry was quiet for a moment. You sound like my dad, he said. I'll take that. Warmth in the bond, quiet and genuine. Get some sleep. 6th year starts in 3 days. Harry looked at the London sky for another minute. Below him, Grimmauld Place held 12 people, and across the city, the wizarding world was frightened and bracing itself, and not yet sure if it trusted the boy who had brought 12 Death Eaters down in the Ministry's own basement. And beyond the city, Voldemort was moving pieces across a board that was very large and very complex. Harry let himself feel the weight of all of it. He didn't push it away. He sat with it on the roof of a creaking house in central London and felt it fully, the fear, the grief still present from Cedric in the year of blood quills and isolation, the love for the people below, the particular ache of knowing exactly what was coming and being unable to make it not come. He felt it fully, and then he let it be what it was, and let himself be what he was. End of summer report. Current level, 10 Shadow Army, 6 General, Cedric Diggory / Sovereign Guard, Regulus Nundu Assault, Fred Acromantulus Scout, Unnamed Spider Cavalry, Unnamed Hippogriff / General, Open Slot. Abilities: Shadow Step LV, 3, Shadow Extraction LV, 3, Shadow Manifestation LV, 2, Shadow Domain LV, 2, Ruler's Authority LV, 2, Shadow Monarch's Aura LV. 1 Horcruxes confirmed, Locket location known, Cup location suspected, Diadem Hogwarts, Nagini with Voldemort, Ring destroyed by Dumbledore, Scar contained by System note. The Monarch has built something worth defending. Now defend it. He went to sleep. In the morning, Hedwig was on the windowsill with a Hogwarts letter in her talons, and Ron was banging on the door about breakfast, and the summer ended the way summers end, not with a conclusion but with the next thing beginning. Harry opened the letter, read his 6th year book list, and felt the year ahead like a current in the water, fast and pulling and entirely, finally something he was ready for. Chapter 6. What the Shadow Holds. The war came to Hogwarts on a Tuesday, not because Voldemort was careless about his timing, because Harry made him come on a Tuesday in March of 6th year, after 8 months of systematically removing every other option from the board and leaving exactly one. This is how it happened. The Horcruxes went first. The locket had been Creature's contribution. He'd known its location since Regulus died for it, had been carrying the guilt of that failure like a stone in his chest for decades. And when Harry told him what he intended to do with the information, the old house elf had looked at him with those enormous eyes and said, very quietly, Master Regulus would have wanted this. They retrieved it from a cave on the south coast in October, Harry and Ron and Hermione, and Cedric in full manifestation, the Inferi in the water rising, and then stopping when Harry pushed the ruler's authority out across the lake's surface, in a ring that held every dead thing beneath it perfectly still. Hermione had destroyed the locket with a basilisk fang, one of a set she'd retrieved from the Chamber of Secrets over the summer after Harry had walked her through the Parseltongue password with the patience of someone who had developed, over a year of the system's training, a very long relationship with doing things properly. The cup was in Gringotts, which had taken a month of planning and an afternoon of execution, and Harry would never fully describe what the dragon they'd released from the vaults looked like in the late afternoon light above London, because some things deserved to stay private. Nobody had been hurt. That was the point. The diadem was in Hogwarts, in the room of requirement, in the room of hidden things, found by Creature's knowledge of old magic, and confirmed by the system's shadow sense threading through the castle's bones. Hermione destroyed it in November with a matter-of-factness that Harry found genuinely admirable. Nagini was the problem. She stayed close to Voldemort, which meant she stayed beyond reach for the time being. Harry had accepted this the way you accept a tactical limitation, not happily, but practically. She would have to be dealt with in the final confrontation. He'd planned for it. The piece of Voldemort's soul in Harry's scar was the other problem. Hermione's solution, when it came, arrived at 2 a.m. in early December, her flying through the door of the Grimmauld Place kitchen where Harry was doing his pre-dawn reading, a book clutched to her chest, her hair doing the thing it did when she'd been awake too long. Sovereign magic, she said. You said the system has been managing the Horcrux fragment, containing it. Yes, Harry said. What if it can do more than contain it? She put the book on the table, old, pre-classical, in a language that was half Latin and half something older, with Hermione's translations in the margins in her cramped handwriting. There are references here to sovereign magic's relationship with the space between endings, the Shadow Realm. It describes the Shadow Realm as here, the place where what should not persist is dissolved. Horcrux fragments are things that should not persist. They persist by anchoring themselves to a living host. Harry looked at her. If the anchor is removed, not the host, the anchor, the fragment loses cohesion, Hermione said. The system has been building a buffer around it. What if the buffer can become a solvent? What if you push the Shadow Realm into the fragment from the inside? You're saying I can destroy it myself, Harry said. I'm saying you might already be doing it and just need to do it with intention. She held his gaze. It would hurt, I won't lie about that. Everything worthwhile hurts, Harry said. He looked at the book. Then he looked at the system's interface at the edge of his vision, quiet and waiting. He asked the system. Query Horcrux dissolution via Shadow Realm interface response. Possible. Process. Direct Shadow Realm pressure applied to anchored fragment. Duration, 3-7 minutes. Pain level significant. Risk to host, moderate. Risk of failure, low. Prerequisite. Monarch must be willing to hold the process through full duration without breaking contact. Note, this will leave a scar. A different kind, tonight, Harry said. Harry, tonight, Hermione. Before I think about it too much and start weighing it instead of just doing it. She looked at him for a moment. Then she closed the book and sat down across from him and said, I'll stay here while you do it. He reached into the door in his chest. What followed was 7 minutes that he would never describe to anyone in detail, not because it broke him, but because some experiences are private in the way that the most important things sometimes are, not secrets, not wounds, just his. He held through it. The system ran the process, and Harry sat at the kitchen table with Hermione's hand over his, and the old house quiet around them, and something that had lived in his scar since he was 11 months old came apart in the dark of the Shadow Realm and was gone. The scar remained. It always would, but the burning pressure behind it gone. Hermione had been crying at some point, and she looked extremely irritated about it. I'm fine, Harry said. I know you are, she said. Shut up. He almost laughed. By January, Dumbledore knew about all of it, the Horcruxes, the scar, the dissolution, and his response was a silence that lasted almost a full minute, which from Dumbledore was geological. You should have told me, he said finally. I handled it, Harry said, and you'd have tried to manage it. Yes, Dumbledore said with the simplicity of a man who has stopped pretending otherwise. I would have. Then you see why I didn't. Another pause. What remains, Dumbledore said, is Nagini and Voldemort himself. Yes, Harry said, and I need you to help me build the conditions for the final confrontation. Dumbledore looked at him across the desk. The portraits were awake and listening, previous headmasters watching the conversation with the particular attentiveness of the historically invested. Fawkes was on his perch, head tilted. What conditions? Dumbledore said. He needs to come here, Harry said. To Hogwarts, on our ground with our people when we're ready. You want to draw him in. I want to remove every other option until this is the one that makes sense to him. Harry leaned forward. We've taken his Horcruxes. The locket, the cup, the diadem gone. The ring, you destroyed that last year. Nagini and the scar are all that remain of his immortality, and he doesn't know the scar is done. He thinks I'm still carrying his fragment. That's leverage, he paused. He'll want to finish this before we can remove any more of his protection. And he's not going to wait for us to bring the fight to him because he lost the last engagement badly. His Death Eaters are in Azkaban. His credibility with the magical community is fragile. The Ministry is against him now. The Giants didn't come because Hagrid and Lupin got there first. The Dementors split when Azkaban's external control was disrupted. Dumbledore was very still. He's more isolated than he looks, Harry said. His best remaining option is a spectacle, something overwhelming that reminds everyone why they were afraid of him. An assault on Hogwarts, on the symbol, on the school that trained Harry Potter, that's the spectacle that makes sense. You want to invite a war, Dumbledore said. I want to fight a war on ground I've prepared, Harry said. That's different from inviting one. The old man was quiet for a long time. The portraits murmured among themselves. Phineas Nigellus Black made a noise of reluctant admiration. Dyles Derwent said something that sounded like finally. What do you need from me? Dumbledore said. The preparation took 6 weeks. Harry walked the castle in January and February with the system's shadow domain running, mapping every shadow, every corner, every corridor where the light didn't reach. Hogwarts was, he discovered, the most shadow-dense environment he'd ever been in, centuries of stone and magic creating depth and darkness in every structural layer. Inside the shadow domain, he could feel the castle like a second skin. Every room, every passage, every space between walls where the castle's bones ran. He could make Hogwarts itself part of his army. The DA had never fully disbanded. It had continued through 6th year, smaller now. The younger students moved to protected roles, but the core of it was still there and was extraordinary. Neville, who had grown into something that Harry could only describe as a force of nature in herbology clothes, had been quietly developing a working knowledge of battle applications of magical plants that Professor Sprout had initially tried to discourage, and then decided to teach properly. Ginny was fast enough now that even Cedric had commented on it. Luna had stopped being difficult to hit because she'd started hitting first, which turned out to be very effective. Harry spent February briefing them. Not everything, not the full picture of the Shadow Army, not the numbers, not the capabilities he was holding in reserve, but the shape of it, the role he needed each of them to play, the designated evacuation routes for students who couldn't fight. The specific positions in the castle that could be defended with minimum exposure, the places where the shadow domain was strongest. McGonagall was the last one he told. He found her in her office on a February evening and laid it out with the same directness he'd brought to every other conversation this year, and she listened without interrupting, sitting very straight in her chair with her hands flat on her desk. And when he finished, she said, "You were one of my students for 6 years, Mr. Potter." "Yes," Harry said, "and I spent most of those 6 years insufficiently aware of what you were capable of." "Most people did," Harry said, without bitterness. "That's fine, it is not fine," McGonagall said, with a precision that suggested she had been carrying this for some time. "But we will address it by winning." She paused. "Tell me what you need." He sent the signal to Voldemort in early March. Not a letter, not a message through any channel that could be intercepted or traced. He sent it through the scar, the connection that Voldemort had been maintaining at the edges of Harry's awareness all year, that Harry had been managing and containing and blocking. He stopped blocking it, just for an hour. He let Voldemort see what he wanted Voldemort to see. The castle, the students preparing, the Shadow Army's outline, enough to be threatening, not enough to be complete. He let Voldemort see Harry standing in the center of it all, unafraid and waiting. Then he shut the connection down and didn't open it again. Voldemort came on a Tuesday. He came in the last hour of daylight, smart, Harry noted, choosing the transition between day and dark, neither the full light that favored defenders nor the full dark that favored the Shadow Monarch, with what remained of his forces. 40 Death Eaters. Giants didn't come as Harry had calculated. Dementors had fractured. But 40 trained, brutal, committed killers moving across the Hogwarts grounds in the evening light was not nothing, and Harry watched them come from the top of the astronomy tower with the same flat calm he'd been building toward for 2 years. Ron was beside him, which was appropriate. 40, Ron said, counting. 41, Harry said. "There's one in the tree line, left flank, holding position." Ron squinted. "I can't see right. Yes, I see the shadow." He paused. "The actual shadow or your shadow?" "Mine," Harry said. "Scout's been tracking him for 10 minutes. "Right." Ron was quiet for a moment. "You ready?" Harry thought about everything that had led here. The graveyard, the door, the year of umbrage, and the DA and Cedric's footwork drills. Grimmauld Place, the Horcruxes, the 7 minutes at the kitchen table. The castle full of people who had trusted him with their training and their safety and their willingness to stand. "Yeah," Harry said. "Let's go." The battle began with the gates. Voldemort's first move was the Hogwarts wards, old, powerful, maintained by Dumbledore's ongoing magic for decades. Harry had expected this. He'd spent February quietly threading the shadow domain through the ward structure, which was the magical equivalent of rebuilding a wall with different mortar. The wards looked the same from outside, but the architecture underneath was different. When Voldemort's curse hit the wards, it met the Shadow Realm's resistance underneath them, and spent itself against something that did not break cleanly. The wards held for 11 minutes instead of the predicted 2. 11 minutes was enough for the castle's defenders to reach their positions. When the gates finally blew, Harry was already at the base of the main steps with Cedric manifested on his left and Regulus, the Nundu, vast and dark as a thundercloud made solid, on his right. Behind him in the entrance hall, the DA was positioned along the upper levels. Neville was in the greenhouses with 3 7th-year students and plants that Harry had been told were capable of immobilizing anything that tried to come through the side entrance. McGonagall had the grand staircase. Lupin, back from the giant mission, had the East Wing with a contingent of Order members. Sirius was where Harry had asked him to be, which was the only place Sirius ever wanted to be, right in the middle. Dumbledore stood 20 feet to Harry's right, and for the first time in 6 years Harry looked at him and felt no complexity about it. Just the simple fact of Albus Dumbledore standing beside him, wand out, ready. Voldemort walked through the broken gates. He walked, not flew, which told Harry something. No theatrics. He'd arrived understanding. This wasn't going to be what it had been before. He came through the gates with his Death Eaters fanning out behind him, and he looked across the ground at Harry and the Shadow Army, and his red eyes moved across everything with the expression of someone completing a calculation. Nagini was around his shoulders. "Harry Potter," Voldemort said. "Tom," Harry said. The pause that followed was extremely satisfying. "Still that," Voldemort said. His voice was controlled. "Still the name." "It's your name," Harry said. "It's what your mother called you." "I don't see why you'd want to throw that away. My mother was a weak woman who, your mother loved you enough to name you after her father and died bringing you into the world," Harry said. "She wasn't weak, she was desperate and alone, and you've spent your whole life punishing everyone else for what happened to her." He held Voldemort's gaze. "I'm not saying this to make you angry. I'm saying it because I think you know it's true and it's the thing you hate most." Voldemort was still. The Death Eaters were still. The grounds were still. Then Voldemort raised his wand and everything began. The Battle of Hogwarts moved through the castle like water finding levels, filling every corridor, every courtyard, every staircase with the specific organized chaos of people who had prepared for this against people who had prepared for something different. Harry moved through the Shadow Domain. With level 10 and the full domain active across the castle grounds, the shadows were his. Not a metaphor, literally, completely, with the absolute control the system had described and that he had spent months making instinctive. He could feel every Death Eater as a disruption in the shadow, could track them through walls, could direct his shadows through the domain with a thought. Cedric took the entrance hall, holding it against 8 Death Eaters with the efficiency of someone who had spent 2 years doing nothing except getting better at exactly this. Harry felt the bond singing with it, Cedric's leadership aura active, the DM. Fighters around him steadier for his presence, their spellwork cleaner. 1 Death Eater disarmed, 2 stunned, 3 more taking cover behind the stone pillars with the particular caution of people who have realized the dead man fighting them is not going to get tired. Regulus, the Nundu, moved through the grounds in shadow form, visible only as a displacement, a wrongness in the air that the Death Eaters on the eastern flank kept firing at without hitting, their curses passing through something that wasn't quite physical and spending themselves on the grass. When Regulus chose to be physical, the effect was terminal, and Harry chose his moments carefully, used it sparingly, because power that only gets used once gets remembered forever. The Acromantula Fred went down the left flank, and it was not subtle. Neville's plants detonated through the side entrance when the Death Eaters there finally broke through. Fanged geraniums, Devil's Snare, 3 modified mandrakes whose repotted scream Neville had apparently been calibrating for something exactly like this. The Death Eaters at the side entrance had a very bad several minutes. Ginny, on the upper level of the entrance hall, was a problem for Voldemort's forces in the specific way that something very fast and very accurate is a problem. She never stayed in one position long enough to be targeted, and every time she moved, she found an angle that nobody had covered. Luna, beside her, had a mirror of Eris she'd borrowed from a disused classroom and angled it with a precision that sent 2 killing curses back to their senders, which was not how killing curses were supposed to work, and which was apparently Luna's own modification based on research Harry hadn't known she was doing. Harry made a note to ask about that later. He found Voldemort in the Great Hall. Not because Voldemort had fought his way there, because Voldemort had walked there, past the battle, through it, because Voldemort had also planned, and his plan was to find Harry and end the battle the fast way. The Great Hall was empty of students, evacuated through the basement passage during the opening phase, and the enchanted ceiling above showed the night sky, clouds moving over stars, the moon not yet up. Voldemort turned when Harry came through the doors. "Nagini," Harry said, looking at the serpent on Voldemort's shoulders. "Put her down." "An interesting request to open with," Voldemort said. "It's not a request," Harry said. "I'm telling you what's about to happen. Nagini is the last of your Horcruxes. I destroyed the scar piece in December, which you probably noticed when the connection changed. The others are already gone. There's nothing left that makes you permanent, Tom. The only thing keeping you alive right now is the same thing that keeps everyone alive, the fact that you're still breathing." Voldemort went absolutely still. "The scar," he said. "Gone," Harry said. 3 months ago. Hurt quite a bit. Worth it." The red eyes moved across Harry, with the expression of someone reading a text they'd thought they understood and discovering entirely new sentences. How, he said, and it was almost, not quite, but almost, a genuine question rather than a challenge. Shadow Realm, Harry said. It doesn't like things that shouldn't persist. Your Horcrux fragment qualifies. Nagini raised her head. Naga, Harry said in Parseltongue, because Parseltongue was the inheritance of Voldemort's own soul fragment, and now that fragment was gone. Harry had wondered since December, whether the ability remained. It did. He felt it sitting in him the same way it always had, a little wrong, a little sideways, but present. You are a living creature. You did not choose this. You are not a Horcrux by your own will. I am giving you a choice. Leave, and I will not pursue you. Stay, and what happens next is not something I can protect you from. Nagini looked at him with those flat ancient eyes. Then she uncoiled from Voldemort's shoulders, slid to the floor, and moved with that liquid serpent speed toward the hall's side door, which opened ahead of her. Harry's ruler's authority, gentle and deliberate, and was gone. Voldemort watched her go. His expression was not betrayal. He didn't love Nagini, not in any genuine sense, but it was something. The last wall coming down. He turned to Harry. His wand came up. Harry raised his hand. The killing curse, Harry said. You're going to use the killing curse. Only thing you believe in deeply enough. It's the whole architecture of your power, death as the ultimate threat, death as the final word. And yet it doesn't work on you, Voldemort said, not bitterly, almost academically. Not for a while, Harry agreed. But that's not actually why I'm not afraid of it. Then why? Because death isn't what you think it is, Harry said. I know that better than anyone. I've been living in the space next to it for 2 years. It's not the end of everything. It's not the punishment you think it is. He met Voldemort's red eyes. You built your whole life on running from something that isn't what you thought it was. That's the real tragedy of you, Tom. Not the evil, the waste. The wand moved. Harry let the Shadow Monarch's aura go fully active, not the ambient pressure it usually ran at, but the complete version, the thing at level 10 that he'd been holding back, because using it fully felt like something that should be saved for exactly this moment. It moved out from him in all directions, visible in the shadows shifting away from it, in the great halls floating candles flaring, and then steadying, in Voldemort, taking one step back. The same step as the Department of Mysteries, except this time Harry stepped forward. I'm not fighting you to the death, Harry said, walking toward him across the stone floor of the great hall while the shadows moved with him like a tide. I'm not trying to kill you, I'm trying to stop you. There's a difference. You can't stop me, Voldemort said. His voice had not broken. He was too old and too certain for his voice to break easily, but something behind it had. I am beyond. You are a man with a wand and no Horcruxes, Harry said. You have a great deal of magical power and enormous determination and a 70-year head start on me, and I still made you step back twice. He stopped 5 feet away. I'm not your equal yet. I will be, probably sooner than you'd like. But that's not the point. He held Voldemort's gaze. The point is that you've been alone your entire life because you made yourself alone, and everything you built on that foundation is coming apart. It was always going to. Something in Voldemort's face moved, very slightly, in the particular way of someone touched in a place they'd believed unreachable. The killing curse came. Harry moved through the shadow step, level 3, carrying the motion through the dark and arriving 3 feet left of where he'd been, and Voldemort's curse hit the stone wall behind him and blew a section of it outward into the night. Harry cast the binding charm from the new position before Voldemort could track him, and then the full body bind, and then the disarming charm, and Voldemort deflected 2 of the 3. The binding charm hit, wrapped his legs, and for one extraordinary moment Voldemort stumbled. Harry caught him with the levitation charm before he hit the ground, because letting him fall felt wrong in a way he couldn't fully articulate and didn't try to. He set Voldemort down against the wall. He picked up the fallen wand. He looked at the most feared dark wizard in a century sitting, propped against the wall of the great hall with his legs magically bound, wandless, mortal, and breathing hard, and he said, "It's over." "You haven't killed me," Voldemort said. "No," Harry agreed. "I haven't. You should. Probably a lot of people would say so." Harry looked at him. "But I think you've been dying since you were 17 years old, and you've been doing it very slowly, and the whole world has been paying the cost of it. I think what you actually need, what you've always actually needed, is to stop." A long silence. "You are extraordinary," Voldemort said, not warmly, not with anything approaching approval. With the flat, genuine assessment of someone who has spent a lifetime evaluating power and has just encountered something he genuinely did not predict. "I know," Harry said. The doors of the great hall blew open. Dumbledore came through first, then Sirius, still grinning, blood on his robes but moving freely. then McGonagall Lupin, the whole ordered force of the castle's defense having apparently reached the same conclusion at the same time. They all stopped when they saw the Great Hall. Voldemort bound and wandless against the wall. Harry, standing in the center of the hall, the shadows all around him, Voldemort's wand in his hand. Dumbledore walked forward until he stood beside Harry. He looked at Voldemort for a long moment with an expression that was the most complex thing Harry had ever seen on a human face. Decades of history and grief and war, and the specific ache of someone who had once known a brilliant, damaged boy and had failed him and had spent 70 years dealing with the consequences. "Tom," Dumbledore said. Voldemort looked at him, said nothing. "It's over," Dumbledore said, more quietly than Harry had expected. The aftermath moved in the particular way of things that have been building for a long time, finally releasing, quickly in some ways, with the specific administrative slowness of institutions in others. Voldemort was taken to a purpose-built containment at the Ministry that had been prepared, in the final weeks before the battle, by Dumbledore and 3 of the most senior Aurors in the country. No Azkaban, Harry had argued that point in one, on the grounds that Azkaban had demonstrably failed twice, and that Dementors as prison guards were a problem he didn't want to deal with again. The containment was different, sealed by charms that operated on the same sovereign magic principles Hermione had identified, a prison not for the body but for the will, and it held. The Death Eaters on the grounds were bound and processed by the Auror Division that arrived 40 minutes after the battle's end. 41 of them, the one who'd been in the tree line, had tried to run and had discovered, in a consequential way, that Fred was faster. Harry gave his report to the Aurors from the Great Hall steps, standing in the cold March night with the castle lit behind him and the grounds showing the marks of the battle in torn earth and scattered stone. He gave it completely, accurately, and without embellishment, and the senior Auror taking the report, the same tall woman with close-cropped hair from the Department of Mysteries, whose name was Amelia Bones and who had turned out to be exactly the right person in exactly the right role, wrote it all down and said when he'd finished, "We'll need a full deposition about the Shadow Army." "I know," Harry said. "Schedule it. There will be ministry hearings, classification questions. People are going to have a great many opinions about what you are. People have been having opinions about what I am since I was 11 months old," Harry said. "They're welcome to them." Amelia Bones looked at him with that filing things away expression. "How old are you?" 16, Harry said. 17 in July. She looked at him for another moment. "Remarkable," she said, and went back to her notes. Inside the castle, the long work of clearing up had begun. Harry sat on the floor of the corridor outside the Great Hall with Ron on one side and Hermione on the other, the 3 of them shoulder to shoulder against the stone wall, and for a while none of them said anything, because there was nothing that needed to be said immediately, and sometimes the best thing is to let a moment be itself. Ron had a cut across his jaw that would scar. Hermione's robes were burned along the left sleeve, a clipping hex from the entrance hall that she'd walked through the edge of. Harry's right hand was bleeding slowly from where a cutting curse had found him during the move through the shadow, and he was applying pressure to it with clinical detachment. "She's going to do the healing charm if you don't let her," Ron said, looking at the hand. "I know," Harry said. "So, sit with it for a second," Harry said. "Let it be real." Ron looked at him, then nodded. They sat with it. Neville came down the corridor at some point, sat across from them against the opposite wall, and looked at the ceiling with the expression of someone who has just done something enormous and is still calibrating how it feels. Luna appeared beside him, apparently from nowhere, carrying her shoes. She'd lost them again and sat cross-legged on the stone floor. "I need to know about the mirror," Harry said to Luna. "Oh," Luna said pleasantly. "Reflected surfaces can redirect energy if you account for the angle of incidence and the magical polarity of the casting. It's in the 3rd volume of Quibbler Archives from 1987. My father wrote about it. People don't read it because the index is confusing. Can we learn it?" Hermione asked. "I can teach it," Luna said. "It took me about a week." A pause. "Luna," Harry said. "Yes, you're extraordinary." Luna considered this with her characteristic sideways equanimity. "I know," she said simply, which was the most Luna possible response, and Ron made a strangled sound that was almost a laugh. Cedric found him later. Not through the bond, through the door of the room of requirement, which Harry had gone to because it was where everything had started, the year before, the first real space he'd made that was his own. The room had become something between a memorial and a workshop over the past year, and he sat in it in the dark without asking it to be anything, and it stayed dark and quiet. Cedric manifested without being called, which he could do now, had been able to do since January, the Shadow Army developing autonomy the system had mentioned and not elaborated on. He sat beside Harry on the mat and was quiet for a while. "It's finished," Cedric said. "This part of it," Harry said. "There'll be reconstruction. The ministry needs rebuilding properly. The school, the families," he stopped, thought about the families on both sides, the grief that didn't care about which side you'd been on. "A lot to do, yes," Cedric said, "but that's different from what tonight was." "Yeah," Harry looked at the wall. "Yeah, it is. Your father would be," Cedric started and then stopped, and there was something in the way he stopped that told Harry Cedric had met James Potter in the Shadow Realm in whatever way that worked, in whatever conversations happened in the space between endings. He didn't ask about it. Some things were private. "I know," Harry said. Cedric was quiet for a moment. "What happens to us now, the army?" Harry had thought about this. He'd thought about it specifically, carefully, with the honesty the question deserved. "You stay," he said, "as long as you want to. The Shadow Realm isn't a trap, you know that. It's a space. What you do in it is your own. And the others, same." He looked at Cedric. "You're not weapons I've used and put down. He searched for the word, found it in the simplest version of the truth, mine. In the way that means I'm responsible for you, not the way that means I own you." Cedric nodded slowly. "Then we stay. Then you stay." Another quiet. "The year the system gave you a tutorial mission on the first day," Cedric said. "Daily training, 2 hours, I remember. How did you feel doing it? That first morning in the common room?" Harry thought about it. 5 in the morning, the common room empty, the castle dark, the world having broken itself the night before and left him alone in it with a crack in his chest and a dead boy's shadow, and a system that said the strong do not wait to be made ready. "Like I was starting something I couldn't see the end of," Harry said. "And now," Harry sat with it. The battle, the castle, the Shadow Army, Voldemort against the wall and Dumbledore saying Tom in that tired voice, Ron and Hermione in the corridor, Luna's shoes, Neville's ceiling stare, the scar on his right hand and the door in his chest, open, deep, patient. "Like I can see the end," he said. "And it's good." Final system update. Host Harry James Potter current level. 10. Level cap removed Shadow Army. 6. Active/stable primary objective. Complete the Shadow Monarch has ended the war. The Shadow Monarch has kept his people alive. The Shadow Monarch has chosen mercy where he could have chosen power. The system notes this is not weakness. This is the mark of a sovereign. Secondary objectives, ongoing. The world does not stop requiring the monarch simply because one war ends. The system will remain. The door remains open. System note, final entry. When Cedric Diggory died, a door opened. Harry Potter did not walk through it because he was chosen. He walked through it because he chose to. That distinction is everything. Harry read the final entry once. Then he let the system's interface close, and he sat in the quiet room of requirement with the shadow of a boy who had once told him take it together over a Triwizard Cup, and he listened to the castle settling around him, the stone breathing, the magic threading through the walls, the sounds of people moving through corridors, the distant voice of Sirius laughing at something Lupin had said, Ron's particular loud exclamation of absolutely not. Hermione followed by Hermione's response of you haven't even read it yet, and he thought, with the simple clarity of someone who has carried something heavy for a very long time and has finally set it down in the right place. I'm here. I'm here and I'm whole and the people I love are alive. That's enough. For tonight, that is absolutely enough. Outside the window, the clouds had broken. The stars were out over the Scottish Highlands, cold and scattered and vast, and the castle threw its warm light across the grounds where the battle had been. And somewhere in the Shadow Realm, a door stood open into something deep and patient and entirely his own, and the Shadow Monarch of Hogwarts sat in the dark and let himself rest.